I was fortunate to meet him about 2 months ago and ask if he wouldn't mind staying up until 3 a.m. Argentina time to join us to converse about what's been going on in and around Mount Uritorco in the Cordoba region of Argentina. He says he's good to go.
On the show with you, greetings from this sleepy, dark, and mysterious Buenos Aires.
The path you took, I just mentioned about your work experience, your history in music, a world-class musician and conductor who becomes one of your continent's most respected investigators of strange phenomena. I'm trying to think of any other conductor who's taken that same path. Are there others in your profession who've done that same, who have an interest in these subjects?
Well, there are actually two or three quite accomplished researchers in fringe fields, like, for example, Jocelyn Godwin, or there is also this British, very well-known UFO author whose name escapes me now, and also the Frenchman Paul Misraki, who was a very famous film music composer and wrote two wonderful books about UFOs and the afterlife. So there is a kind of small tradition, even if perhaps not so well known to the main public, to the wider audience.
I remember reading about crop circles, when the crop circles were really front and center, a lot of public interest in them, not as much now, but there were those who made comparisons and tried to view the crop circles through a musical prism, looking for similarities between scales and crop circles. Did you ever get into that?
Not specifically, but I can tell you music and fringe studies are not unrelated at all. We should really go back to the ancient times in ancient Greece, where Aristotle and other philosophers explained the structure of the universe in terms of sound, tone, and music. The famous harmony of the spheres. So I think it's quite a central topic, a central issue for discussion if we discuss consciousness and afterlife and UFOs and the existence of other humanities. It makes all the sense in the world for me.
Your interest started in your teens. You started reading about this guy who's kind of a guru, a mystic, who made a lot of claims about the paranormal, supernatural, claimed to be a healer, and became a guru, very famous, became very familiar with a lot of dictators in South America. And his first name is Angel. His middle name is Christo or Christ. That seemed like a great name for a guy who's going to be a guru, but he made a lot of stuff up, right?
Yeah, sure. What you say is quite correct. His given names were Angel and Christ, and then his family name was a very popular, very usual Greek family name, Agoglanis. Now, I started with this in a rather more interesting way, not reading, because when I was in my teens, there was virtually nothing to read about this guy. The thing is, when I was in my teens, I used to go on holidays, on summer holidays, to spend part of my vacation time with my grandmother, maternal grandmother, who had relocated nearby this place, Mount Uritorco, in Cordoba, Argentina. And she happened to be in very friendly terms with the owner of a part of the mountain. And this guy was a friend of Akoglanis and was the one who granted him access to a kind of panoramic esplanade on the mountain, in which this guy, chanting, made his contact rituals with mystery lights, let's put it that way, to begin with something.
Mystery light. So just to backtrack a little bit, I read one of your papers that you wrote about this guy, and you lay it out. Basically, you just say it flat out. He was a notorious liar, a bigamist. His medical credentials is. Go ahead. You can tell us about him.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a con man in many ways. He boasted, medicine doctoral degrees. He was not a physician. He never ended his primary school even, so he was almost an illiterate. But on the other side, he was able to heal. That was the amazing thing. He could cure a lot of major problems in the health area. So it was a very controversial, very convoluted kind of character, and he really had so many faces to him. It's a very singular case, or perhaps not. We can discuss this later on, because after 25 years of research into this, I was able to ascertain a lot of lies, deceits, hoaxes, frauds, and that he was a con man in many senses, in many ways. But I was also able to ascertain a certain percentage of paranormal events which are genuine and impossible to explain in rational terms. Not only healings, but also the appearance of some forms of energy, of luminous energy, of balls of lights in the middle of nowhere, which are really very difficult to account for in a rational way. So it's a very convoluted case in which, once again, true and false, lies and real facts just go together hand in hand, which, by the way, I will tell you this right away, in my humble opinion, this is a landmark, a trademark of the phenomenon. It almost likes to deal with those kinds of opposites. In my view, my personal view, that's no coincidence. This dirty intermixing, intertwining of real things and of, false, gullible mumbo-jumbo, in my view, that's an integral part of the phenomenon and not just human contamination.
Yeah, it's not just a side effect. It is a central feature of the, we'll just use air quotes, phenomena, that it deceives us. It sometimes gives us bits of truth mixed with a lot of deception, and that is the rule, not the exception, right?
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
This guy that you investigated, this guru, sort of embodies that. At the same time that he is obviously a fraud, his credentials are fraud. He was a bigamist who traveled from town to town, fathered all kinds of kids, got married multiple times, made outrageous claims, and yet still surrounding him, seemingly miraculous things happened. And he led you, in essence, he led a lot of people to this Uritorco, right? He focused on it.
Exactly. And once again, if you think of similar characters in the story of contactism, UFO, ET contactism, and guruism, shall we say, it's not the only case. Let's think about someone like Edward Billy Meyer in Switzerland. Very interesting and we would say, coherent claims, interesting claims, and then some pictures and footage which are interesting, and some others which are clearly a fraud. And also a very shady guy. And you have the same thing, for example, with the Italian Eugenio Siragusa. You have compelling witnesses and compelling stories, and you have a certain coherence to the story, to the main story, the main narrative. In my view, it's really not an exception, once again. It's almost a constant. It's almost impossible to be a guru-like figure in these contactism cases and not have, at the very least, two faces to this kind of characters. That's one of the reasons why I'm growing more and more convinced that the phenomenon looks for this kind of, person, for this kind of personal profile. And also the phenomenon may also confuse the experiencers and drive them to falsify things, to exaggerate claims, to forge evidence. it's really a trickster syndrome, in my humble opinion, and that makes the phenomenon so shady and so difficult to accept in academia and by scientists. Because, of course, when you see all this dirt, you don't want to get mixed up with this. I mean, it doesn't look serious or neat or easy. But once again, there's this saying in Italian. I don't know if you have something similar in English, really, in which they say that once you have a baby with dirty diapers, you throw out the diapers, but with a baby in it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Right. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, is our saying. Yeah.
Exactly. Good. That would be the American expression. So the thing is, in my view, gullible people, fideistic and very religious people, they get the diaper. Skeptics, debunkers, and most scientists, they do not get either the diaper and the baby. I think it's about time a third party of open-minded but serious researchers take the diapers and put it away and focus on the baby, if you know what I mean.
I do. By studying this guy, Angel Christ, and learning about his flaws as well as the mystical experiences that happen around him, you helps you form a framework for how you proceed on these topics. In that, it's a main feature of the phenomena is that it doesn't want to be figured out and seen, captured in pictures. It always wears a mask or several masks, as you say.
Absolutely. That's my thought exactly. I think another problem for this phenomenon to be really embraced as a worthy research subject by academia and mainstream science is this. These wearing masks, this being culture specific, geography specific, history specific, and I will give you some examples of this. Let's for a moment take up religious appearances and visions. As you well know, you get Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ and their angels in places like Fatima, Portugal, or Garabandal, Spain, or Rome, Italy, which are quintessential Christian Catholic countries. You don't get Shiva and Ganesh in either Spain, Portugal, or Italy. On the other side, of course, in Calcutta or New Delhi in India, you don't get the Virgin Mary or the blessed Jesus or the angels or demons, Christian demons. You get Shiva and Ganesh. And a third example, which are the countries in which you have more UFO, nuts and bolts UFO sightings? Yeah, just to sum it up a little bit, a further example, even more detailed, when Jesus Christ appears to some believer or stigmata are formed in the body of a religious person, as you well know, the hand wounds, they tend to appear in the wrong spot, in the center of the palm of the hand, which is not historically or anatomically accurate. And once again, Jesus or Virgin Mary tends to be very white and blondish and with clear-colored eyes and not Semitic at all. So once again, it's always culture-based. And in my opinion, this is the thing that led so many scientists to say, well, if each person sees what that person wants, that's because it's all in his mind or her mind. And I think that's a big mistake.
You have shared some emails with myself and Colin Kelleher about your work and the similarities with Skinwalker Ranch to the kinds of phenomena that you have seen yourself at Mount Uritorco. And I guess your interest, there was a couple of different reasons for your interest in that region, but this guru that we were talking about set up sort of a camp, a base there, and led people out to see seemingly miraculous things in the sky and in the countryside. So tell us a little bit about the reputation of Uritorco, how far back it goes, and the kinds of phenomena that people have seen.
Well, I would tell you, the whole Uritorco story really started in 1983 because it was a story which was initiated by this guy, Akoglanis, really. If there was anything weird or strange in that area before that, we don't know for sure. It's a very person-centered, person-oriented case. Having said that, I did not have the privilege to be in person at the Skinwalker Ranch, which I know you have. But after reading the two excellent books that you wrote with Colin Kelleher and the second one with Dr. Lakatsky, I made a chart of 12 phenomena typology, we would say, 12 of phenomena going on at the Skinwalker Ranch. And I have the chart here with the overlapping chart of the Uritorco area. And I think that I see that 11 out of 12 are a match. I mean, you have unusual and strange animals lurking around in both places. You see impossible creatures, or at least completely unknown creatures in both places. You get to see orbs or flying lights of different colors, which seem to denote volition, intelligence, in both places. You have what you may call UFOs of an apparent metallic nature, I mean, nuts and bolts UFOs, usually very silent in both places. You have celestial or underground voices and mechanic sounds, unexplainable like tunnels or windows to another dimension, portals, electromagnetic and in general energy anomalies which can be picked up by our technology, feelings of a mysterious presence which may communicate through telepathy, poltergeist phenomena. Very important, a Native American background in the Skinwalker area and at the Uritorco area. In both cases, you have a very strong Native American root and legends, and also stories of conflict and violence. And you have also, in my humble opinion, a conduit individual or individuals. I mean, you have contact men or women, as you had with Akoglanis at the Uritorco. I'm of the opinion that the ranch owners, that lovely couple with which Dr. Kelleher worked, they were really the main target of the phenomenon. And then the only difference would be the cattle mutilation. I'm not aware of cattle mutilation at the Uritorco, but I'm aware of a lot of missing people, missing persons in that area, which is even more creepy.
But people just disappear.
Yeah, and sometimes they turn up dead. So for a small town like Capilla del Monte, which is the small town at the foot of the Uritorco, the statistics for people disappearing or getting, strange, mortal, deadly accidents or even homicide is extremely high, extremely suspicious.
You used the phrase person-oriented, meaning the phenomena zeroes in on people and it sort of uses them as magnifiers, or it goes down into their heads and picks out bits and pieces, and then it shows people what's already into their brains? What do you mean?
Yeah, that's my opinion. I'm being very bold discussing Skinwalker Ranch with Paul because you are the experts. But from reading the two books very attentively, to me, it's quite clear that the most outstanding phenomena used to happen when those two people were around, if you think about it. Either without the investigators or with them. But the two of them, the couple, were present most of the time. And when they weren't present, it was very difficult to pick up and also to record phenomena. It was usually a very fleeting phenomena, one-to-one, something that you just see and cannot capture with a camera or with a sound recording equipment. So to me, that is very, very interesting. I tend to believe that those two were not the only, but the main targets of the phenomena there.
You had some experiences yourself at Uritorco. Can you share those with us? And we'll come back to the Skinwalker comparison.
Oh, well, I can try. I'm not very much into that.
Okay.
I can certainly try. No problem. Yes, I had 2 or 3 personal experiences while researching the field. I went, during 25 years, regularly to the Uritorco to do field work. So in 2 or 3 occasions, I did have very powerful and strange experiences with clouds, I would say, with real clouds up there in the sky, which were moving in a very unusual way, extremely unusual way, I mean. It's not something you can explain with weird winds. And I also saw huge flashes of silver light, and I also saw golden, smaller flashes of light moving, also stopping at the zenith of the flash action and kind of, drawing a picture of something, a kind of sun with rounded spikes. And together with a friend who was with me, fronted a kind of small, a medium-sized orb / cloud at very near distance with some kind of activity inside, like multicolored gas or liquids intermixing, bluish, gray activity.
Well, that sounds an awful lot like the bluish liquid in these orbs that we're seeing at Skinwalker Ranch. This, by the way, the thing you call a cloud was like 5 meters off the ground, right? It's not way up in the sky. It's right on the ground where you could look at it.
It was not exactly an orb. It was an elongated, regular shape. That's why I'm also calling it a kind of cloud. I have to tell you, George, when I first read in the, if I recall rightly, the first book about the ranch, description of this orb with bluish lights and activity inside, the book I almost fell off of my hands to the ground, because that's a really close description what I saw and also interacted with in the Uritorco area. And this thing, I can tell you, which was either intelligent or controlled by something intelligent.
Was there communication with you between it and your friend or you?
The weird mafia messages, if you allow me weird expression, because at one time it terrorized its friend into panic by having him hear a kind of chorus in the distance, which I didn't hear, by the way. which is 100% impossible in the middle of nowhere at midnight in the place to hear a chorus. It's just absolutely impossible. There's no rational explanation for that. So he heard that and went into coma almost. I mean, he was really freaked out. He was crazy with fear. And after a while, it sort of triggered something similar in me, but not so extreme and without any triggering event. I mean, at one point, they called serene and very, normal. And as if this thing were a button in my head, I had a sudden, quite profound feeling of fear. Then I knew it was time to leave this thing alone. And so we did.
Is there... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Fraud and deceit and hoaxes, but also real.
You know what it's like for, the criticisms of the ranch is the people would see this stuff. Even if they had a camera, which they're ranchers, they're not trying to document it for UFO world. I don't even know if they could have used it because so often when the investigators were around, the equipment, recording gear, cameras, etc., batteries would die. All that stuff was useless against the phenomena. If you tell someone, we tried to get pictures of it, but boy, you should have seen it, they'll say, oh, sure. Sure. They don't believe you because it's hard to accept that this, whatever it is intelligent, it's evasive, it does not want to be documented. But that is one of your conclusions, that it appears to us here and there, but doesn't really want us to get a real solid fix on it.
I think you got it right. I mean, it's very well put. And once again, I don't think the phenomenon tends to work on a one-to-one basis or with very small group of people and to avoid technological detection. But then it does, because once you have the experience yourself, you become convinced and you change as a person. The problem, of course, is that you cannot pass on your experience in the tell the story. And I think this is the way it works.
You know what? Is there anything about Uritorco that makes it special, other than people have seen this stuff there, at least back to the 1980s? Is it the people who are there that caused the phenomena, or is it something that has always been there that is just now revealing itself since the 80s?
Well, in my opinion, there are several interesting things to mention here. One is certainly this Akoglanis guy was a conduit. He was a contact man for these intelligence, consciousness, beings, or whatever you want to name them. That's for sure. Then it's a place in which a huge slaughter of Native American people happened. And there's also literature about that. I mean, more than one hotspot, several hotspots around the world are somehow tied with battles or very violent historical situations. So I think that could be also a thing. And it could be also a thing at the Skinwalker Ranch, by the way. Oh. You know, there were also problems among the pre-Columbian people out there.
Sebastiano, I know for a lot of people who delve into these waters that it becomes frustrating because answers are hard to come by. We really don't know. We don't even know for sure what questions to ask, but we do know that we don't have really solid answers to any of the big ones. We don't know what this is, where it's from, what its intention is, how long it's been here. You in an interview, a podcast with Stuart Davis, you used a phrase that stuck in my head. You said, I'm fine with not knowing, rather than jump to a conclusion to put yourself in a box. You're okay with not really knowing the answer. You just maybe it's the search for answers that is the point of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think you put it very well. Yes, I wouldn't say I'm okay with that. I'm certainly not happy with that. But okay. I mean, I'm coming to believe, and this is just an idea, just a gut feeling, that we as a species, Homo sapiens, we may not be equipped to see and really understand this reality, this layer of existence, this realm of being. And, sometimes I'm a person which is very much worried about animal welfare. And I think about, for example, dogs. If I were a dog, I would certainly be aware of the presence of people around me, but I wouldn't understand nothing about their society, culture, and technology. And by the way, if I'm a lucky dog, I will be a very loved and cared for pet in a good household. But if I don't get lucky, I may be on my own on the streets without water and food, or even in the hands of a person who may, torture me or kill me. I'm starting to wonder if we are not the dogs and cows or even plants without sentient beings, certainly, but without the necessary equipment, the right eyes, the right ears, to just see the people, the beings which are above us. We certainly know the ones which are below us, minerals, plants, and animals. But I'm wondering about the ones that may be, above us, which certainly see and understand us, but not the other way around.
Yeah, we ask, why don't they land on the White House lawn? Why don't they show themselves and have a conversation with us? I mean, you could also say, why don't people talk to rocks? I do talk to cats and dogs once in a while. I don't expect them to understand me, but I've been known to have a conversation with them. But it's more of being friendly than trying to.
Let alone hand a cell phone to a dog or a cow or a plant. Yes, a dog or a cow may see the cell phone, but there's no way he will understand what's that about. I think we may be in a similar position, which is intriguing and a bit frightening.
We get glimpses of what to us looks like technology, advanced technology, sometimes far in excess of anything we have, and sometimes only just barely ahead of what we have, as if inspiring us to try to duplicate it. Is the technology sort of a side product of what could be some kind of an illusion or a mind game, or does this intelligence, or maybe it's plural intelligences, do they need that technology to actually get here?
I don't have the faintest idea, but I do know this. Below us, we have animals, plants, and minerals. And animals are pretty much aware of our species, although in an incomplete way. Plants are less aware, and minerals, perhaps they are not aware at all. And I'm wondering, perhaps above us, we have several layers of beings. And sometimes we get in contact with a layer which is pretty near to us, and sometimes we get into contact with beings which are far removed and far above us, and we just don't get a thing. There's no way to know, right? But I think at least it's a logical way to try to reason. But of course, we don't know.
You've written that, or maybe it was on Stewart's podcast, where you said, trying to separate UFOs from these other phenomena is just not a good idea. We don't know that they're separate and distinct, and assuming that things like the cattle mutilations or Bigfoot or poltergeist activity are unrelated to what look like technical devices that fly around in the sky is an assumption we probably shouldn't make.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you two things. The first reason, in my opinion, we shouldn't do that is because there's something in common with all of them, with no exception. And that thing in common, it's us, our own participation on the phenomena. Just, providing the costumes and the masks for the phenomenon. And just a very short example. There are these two cases in Italy occurring at the same time of voices coming through a radio. In one city, they introduced themselves as ETs. In another nearby city, very similar voices introduced themselves as the voices of dead people. Exactly the same phenomenon, same place almost, same country at least, same time frame. And they give you different explanations. So I think it's quite logical to think that it's all connected some way.
You know, we've reported it, we wrote about it, about OSAP, this program overseen by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which started as a UFO program. The funding was to focus on UFOs, but also to follow the evidence wherever it led. And the evidence led to some pretty strange stuff. Skinwalker Ranch, what we would compare to poltergeist activity. It may not be poltergeist, but that's how it was behaving. Strange animals, cattle mutilations, things of that sort that seemingly have nothing to do with UFOs or UFO technology, but that you had to follow the evidence where it led, and that's where it led. That was the program. It was replaced because people became uncomfortable with that, in part because they were uncomfortable with all the strange trails that effort led to. And a couple of years later, there was a new program, ATIP, that only focused on military sightings, UFOs, sensor data, radar, things of that sort, which, you know, I don't think you're ever going to figure this stuff out if that's all you look at. You have to follow the evidence where it leads. I think that's what you're suggesting.
Not only that, I think we have to come to accept that the few interactions we may have with this phenomenon are on the phenomenon's terms and not ours. And the phenomenon tends to laugh at our science, at our technology, at our knowledge, at our money. And who knows, perhaps the way to try to communicate with this, since we are coming to understand that it is something with intelligence, with personality, something that may be alive, it's in a very respectful way, very prudent and cautious way. Like, knock, knock, may I come in? I'm so-and-so. I would like to communicate with you. And I will just sit alone in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of the night, and just make silence, no technology with me, and see what happens.
Yeah, back again to compare it to Skinwalker, the NIDS team that was there on the ranch after Bigelow bought the place in the mid-'90s. They came in gangbusters with technology and cameras and gear and sensors and tried to document things. And for a while, the phenomena played along with that. They had some really spectacular incidents. Whatever it is revealed itself to them in very unusual ways. And then the whole equation changed. After the first couple of years, this thing became less frequently seen. It wasn't as spectacular. It made it even more impossible to document encounters and sightings. And then it went underground. And then, for a while, at least until NIDS gave up, then it came back. And it's there now, but it could go away again, depending on, whether it thinks it's fun or not. I don't know what it is that triggers changes in its approach. But it does get frustrating for people trying to get answers. But again, as you said, it calls the shots. The rules, it makes up the rules. It decides what we're allowed to see, right?
And I think you got it right. I get the impression sometimes that the phenomenon gets bored with us.
Yeah.
It expects more from us. And then it gets bored and goes away.
So you called them semi-invisible shepherds of yet unknown intentions. Do you allow yourself theories about where they're from, what they are? Is it a they or is it an it?
Well, it all comes back to the example I was mentioning with minerals, plants, animals, persons. I tend to think we, in this very same planet, on the surface of planet Earth, there are as many layers of life, of sentient life above us, as they are below us. We certainly know about the ones below us. We don't know a thing about the one above us. So I I'm starting to think, to suspect that we are the plants, and these things may be what Homo sapiens is to plants. So we are aware of their existence, but you don't have the tools to really interact in a way that is fulfilling for us.
You had mentioned at the time when you talked earlier about this cloud that wasn't really a cloud, that there were some red lights, these red lights that you saw, and you jumped in a car and jammed up the hill or whatever to try to intercept them, right? And then again, this thing sort of laughed at you with that attempt.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your last words.
The phenomena sort of laughed at your attempt to intercept it. It wasn't impressed by that, right?
I think so, yes. And in the end, it also got bored. That was the feeling we got after, like, I don't know, half an hour without the last orb or cloud or mist. We got the impression it got bored and just scared the hell out of us just to leave it be. Yeah. We are not sure, of course, but that was the impression we were under.
And I think I remember reading that you had talked about these red objects that were in the sky and they froze in the sky. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Oh, well, it's very difficult to describe, actually. That particular night, we had a three-part phenomenon. First, huge flashes of silver light, but huge, I mean, giant flashes of silver light on the other side of the mountain. And then on another spot, around some hills, we got these smaller flashes of red and golden light, but they were really very difficult to describe because it were flashes, but they stopped at one point, like drawing in the horizon, and then you have to imagine a kind of depiction of the sun, but the sun spikes, they are rounded up with balls at the end. This was really strange. And by the way, impossible to capture with a camera. We tried, but nothing came out of it. Just a tiny light in the horizon. So it was impossible to capture on camera this amazing kind of crown. And then the third and last part, we got this kind of orb cloud with the, I don't know, liquid gas. We will never know what that was.
We've reported about dogmen at the ranch and other places, and you had an interesting observation about dogmen. I don't know if they had reported these any kind of similar creatures exactly like dogmen at Uritorco, but you made an interesting observation about shapeshifter animals, dogs and dogmen, wolves, shapeshifters, things of that sort, and where they pop up in different religions and cultures. Could you share that with us?
In the Uritorco area, we had some experiences with a kind of huge bull on two legs, which is really a crazy thing. So I don't know. I'm not aware of many stories about canines or dogs or wolves or dogmen at the Uritorco area. But I can surely tell you that there's a cultural thing, a very ancient cultural thing, which with dogs and dogmen and canines in general, which has to be, it's related to Anubis, the Egyptian god. It's related to Sirius, the constellation of the dog. It's relating to the Bible when they call the dog in Hebrew Caleb, and then you have the Mormons, which, by the way, you have the Skinwalker Ranch in a Mormon state. They name Kolob, which is almost the same like Caleb. They call Kolob the planet in which God dwells. So there's so many histories, so much culture around dogs and canines. and jackals and dogmen, that it's really a thing for a lifetime research. Lots of coincidences about dogs and dog-related creatures all around the world.
The Egyptians, yeah, they is it Anubis? Anubis.
Yeah, Anubis, right? That was a real dogman.
When they appear to us in that form, what the heck is that about? Just to mess with our heads? What could be going on there?
Quite probably, yeah, quite probably. I think they can manifest themselves, or it can manifest itself only through what it will find inside of our mind. So, or a variation of it. I mean, sometimes perhaps to puzzle us, it will mirror what we have in our brain with something different but related to it. I'm really growing more and more convinced that this is the case. We participate not only as experiencers or witnesses, we really provide the meat and bone of the impersonations. It doesn't matter if it is an orb, an animal, a cryptoid, a nuts and bolts UFO. I do think we provide the aesthetics. You know, we provide the sets and costumes and masks.
We started our conversation talking about this guru who was the subject of some papers that you wrote. He made a very violent end.
Oh, yes. It was a dramatic and theatrical way out for a dramatic and theatrical and convoluted story. In 1989, he was 64 years old. He was at his office in Buenos Aires, and he got a visit from his very best friend, which, by the way, was a person who used to work with General Perón, ex-president of Argentina. This person told Acoglanis, listen, I have here something for you. And then he shot 7 times and left his so-called friend in a pond of blood. He was, of course, immediately dead as he hit the pavement. And then this guy, whose name was Ruben Antonio, went immediately to the nearest police station to confess. And he did so with these words, which I will quote literally, verbatim. Do you know what you have to do with sorcerers? You have to kill them. I just killed a sorcerer, and now I feel pretty much relieved.
You know, I could see some of his ex-wives, because he would marry women, father children, and then abandon them, move on to something else. Yeah. It's amazing that an ex-wife didn't gun him down at some point.
Yes, absolutely. That was another, let's say, phase to this person. He had this Don Juan complex, which got him into trouble, serious trouble, and this was also the case with his best friend and his best friend's wife. So that's also an element in the mixture.
He was very close with several strongmen. You mentioned about this guy who was associated with Perón, but he was this guy Acoglanis was close with strongmen of other countries who came to him for medical treatments, right?
Yes. Not being a physician himself, he posed as one. He was the main consulting physician for several presidents and secretaries of state and very well-known finance gurus and famous, actors, TV personalities. So he was a very simple person, but surrounded by quite an entourage.
You've written that, in essence, these places that become hotspots, that it's not entirely accidental, maybe, that the intelligence, the phenomena, whether it's religious sanctuaries or sacred places or places like Uritorco or Skinwalker, that people are drawn there, and that's part of the phenomenon, is that it seems to almost want notoriety because it, in essence, feeds off of people. It it enjoys that energy that's created, whether it's fear or other kinds, or pain or faith, violence, things like that. Do you believe that?
I think it's a possibility. And once again, let's revert to the examples I was giving about people and animals. People like you and me who love animals will give a lot of attention and love to our pets, to our dogs, and we will have that back also from them. So very strong feelings. And also perverted people may get pleasure from another kind of very intense feelings, like torturing people or torturing animals. So to me, there may be a component of that. I think it's a kind of, it has to it's related to the food chain, to the universal general food chain about the bigger fish and the smaller fish.
Sebastiano, how do people find your work? Is there a central location? I know you've written 3 books, but they're in Italian and Spanish, not in English. So are there articles in a central archive that our listeners could find?
Well, there are a couple of papers, of articles, which I'm sure will go online shortly. The books, as you well said, are right now in Italian and Spanish, but I do hope to get at least one of them translated into English. The reception of my work is interesting, I think. It has at least 2 sides. The people I tend to debunk, self-appointed fake gurus profiting from gullible people. They are very angry at me, extremely angry. And then you have, of course, the professional scientist, debunker, skeptic, who's also not happy. But you cannot make everyone happy. That's life.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you've said it, and I've read it in some of your work that the fakes, the people who are con men, are drawn to this topic. There's no getting around it. They've always been that way. I guess it comes with the territory. It gums up the works. It makes it harder to get around that. It makes it easier for people to want to debunk it, right?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's very important to really try to get rid of them.
As the Irish say, meaning places where the line between our world and other worlds, other realities, is thin. And sometimes the one can bleed over into the other. They can come here, whoever they are. Maybe we go there, too, wherever there happens to be. The deception of gods and men. Barry, it's great to have you back, and I can't wait to get into this.
Hi, George. It's great to speak to you. And it's been some time since we spoke last.
It is. I was reviewing the transcripts of interviews that you and I had done before, including one with Stephen Mira, and how we started talking about commonalities in the investigation of things that are paranormal, supernatural, that there appear to be links between them. And it's a theme that I've pursued, maybe not as long as you have, but looking for commonalities between UFOs, ETs, gods, angels, demons, cryptids, cattle mutilations, all that stuff. And there are some, and there are similarities that we'll talk about tonight. You've been chasing that for a long time, but it seems like in looking back, you were on the trail of this book a long time ago, and it seems like you've reached this conclusion, this place, in an uncomfortable sort of a way, that you're not entirely comfortable with describing your findings. Is that correct?
It's funny you should say that, because looking back after I finished this particular book, The Deceptions of Gods and Men, I went back and looked over some of the previous books, in particular The Influence, which looked at the biological implications of what was happening when these things came through and tried to approach us, and what our bodies were doing at that specific time. And seeing how 10 years ago that particular story was going to be connected directly to this one, and in greater detail. And I was just blown away by seeing that. Initially I thought this story came about because of my interaction on the island of the dead here in Ireland, and it was a horrific experience. But I thought it was that had put me onto this particular phenomena. But no, it wasn't. It was something that I had come across years before, which was playing itself out as the years progressed. And you're right. We were seeing this commonality that was filtering its way through a lot of the fringe research fields, and introducing high levels of deceit and deception, and that was something that was infuriating me. And I got some feedback from a reader down in New Zealand, and he said, "Does this book mean that I shouldn't go near anything paranormal-wise?" And I said, "No, the book is not designed for that. The book is just to wake us up to challenge what is coming through, and by challenging, then we will see the greater deception unfold." It certainly wasn't to scare people off. It was to make them change their perception slightly, not to accept the first thing that comes along.
Let's start with, can you give us sort of the thesis, the overall premise of the book in the broad strokes, and then we will dig into the journey that you made to get you to this point. So describe the sort of the structure of where we're going, and then we'll jump back to maybe the Island of the Dead.
Well, the book itself looks at these common factors that slip through many of the fringe research fields. And a lot of the listeners will understand phenomena such as missing time, mischievous nature, abduction, mutilation, deception. Now, that in itself are just a small sample of common factors that we find in ufology. But that also rolls into earth spirits. That also neatly rolls into jinn. And that also rolls into the old gods. We keep pushing the boundaries back further and further and further. Now, when we try and follow this phenomenon by the way it appears, we end up getting nowhere. We ended up driving into a brick wall, so to speak, because it only goes back so far. Whenever we really started pushing this back, we were seeing this deceptive aspect to it that was unfolding. And what we needed to do was to track it via the phenomena in which it interacted with us. That opened up a whole new avenue for us that brought us right back to the doors of Babylon. And that has been a really eye-opener for us. Now, the book itself is designed to really break apart these fields of commonality and to really expose what is coming through the veil and also try and highlight possibly where it's coming from and the origins behind that.
It's a fundamental question for all of us on this planet, in this life, the struggle between good and evil within ourselves, within societies, the idea that there are angels and demons, that there's good and bad, that there are beings of light, beings of darkness. Your premise is they could all be the same thing, that the grand deception is there's one force and it pretends to be different things, but it's all really the same thing with the same aim, right?
That's absolutely right. It's of the same coin, both faces of the same coin. And this story that we tend to find this, and I call it the broken record, this particular story of good versus evil, of them versus the others, it's all the same thing. And we tend to find this story can reveal itself even twice in a generation. And it's the same story, fundamentally at the core, it's the same story, time and time and time again. And what really started to irk us was the fact that we seem to forget. As a species, we've forgotten and we don't listen to the old stories anymore. And that fundamental core of the story of one side versus the other is something we see all the way back through time, and the manipulation of us in particular always evolves itself around these subject matters, and that has been very, very damaging, I believe, for us as a species. But as we get further into it, we'll break it down and and see what is hiding behind that, and primarily where it's possibly coming from.
I describe you as, a boots on the ground investigator. You go out into the field, you go into the pit of hell, you go into spooky places, haunted buildings. You try your best to confront whatever these things are head on. You had an experience on the island of the dead. That can be sort of an example so people can get a sense of how you work and how fearless you are. Go ahead and tell us what happened.
Well, we were designing a series of books called Legend Seekers here on the island, which really delved at what we were intending to do was to inspire our youth back out onto the landscape and away from the PlayStations and the Xboxes, and get them back into the environment. And we came across this particular story, which we call the Island of the Dead. Ironically, we didn't know until 10 years later how true we actually were when we said that. But this particular island was known as a place of oracle. And it was a place, even from the medieval period, that people were coming from all over Europe to go to, a small island in County Donegal on the west of Ireland. And this particular place, as legend would have it, is it would test you physically, spiritually, and mentally. You would actually, it would feel like you were walking through the depths of hell. And so we went, and Cormac and I, co-author, we've heard many stories, of course, of that particular nature, and we tended to go, oh yeah, here's another one, and off we went to investigate, not actually understanding what we were about to step into. And getting to the island in itself can be relatively dangerous because of the nature of the lake in which it lies, and the rocks. The rocks are very, very shallow, and it can easily take the bottom out of a boat. But by the time we got to the island, we cleared permission from the church, and off we went. Now, this particular island, it was claimed, as I said, was a place of oracle. And for them to give us permission, initially the church said, there's nothing there on the island. We don't know why you're going there. And we were saying, well, we're just following the old ancient maps. Well, the maps are wrong. There's nothing there. Now, even looking at the satellite image, we could see that there was something fundamentally still within the island itself that matched the old maps. But we said, look, we would like to go anyway and see. And it turned out that particular place is exceptionally potent on levels beyond our understanding. And the church did try and harness that. Now, this was a place that was being used by the Celts, and no doubt it was a place that was being used by the Neolithic thousands of years before. This was a place, one of those liminal places that you spoke about opening the show there. And in itself, the church couldn't work with it. And by order of the Pope, that place, that island was shut down, and it was duplicated on another island on the same lake. And today you can still go and try and appease your sins and whatnot on the fake island, but the original island is still very much there, sitting quietly. And when we ended up going to the island, there were these unusual pits that the vegetation didn't grow in. And it was very, very odd because the whole place, there was much high grass and fern growth, and many times it was over our heads. Yet these pits, the growth didn't seem to grow in them, and no one had been on the island for years, like hundreds of years. And there are no wildlife on the island, and it was just very, very odd. But they were the only places that we could camp, in the pits. And we set up the camp and off we went to explore, and we found the remains of the old church, the old graveyard, and all of those things that were on the maps were on the island, as per the stories and the legend associated with. And it was only when night started to fall, when the sun was beginning to set, that's when the entire signature of the island changed. And it's a very, very hard thing to explain, George, but you feel the entire air, the atmosphere of the whole place turns on its head. And you're very aware, your instinct is really whispering to you at that point, something is not right. And that particular night, I have to say I'm an avid stargazer, or was at least an avid stargazer. And that particular night, I never ventured out of the tent. And the dog, my dog that was with me, Max, he even buried his head underneath the sleeping bag. And I said, that's very unusual behavior for him as well. And Cormac was in a tent further down in his own pitted area. Now, what I can describe is, as I was landing in the tent, it felt like a wave washed through me continually, just wash after wash after wash. It was almost like a magnetic pulse that was washing through as we lay there. Now, I did not know that Cormac was experiencing the same thing. And that in itself was the initial introduction to the island of the dead. And just shortly after that, that's when the vision, if you like, happened, in which I was able to see the ruins of the church. And I have to say, people will take ayahuasca, they'll take all sorts of magic mushrooms and everything else to have these experiences. I didn't even have a cup of tea. The experience was so intense that when the image of the church was shown, there was a pit that was beside it. And within the pit were serpents. And the serpents were furious that initially that I was there. I should not have been there. And they were exceptionally distraught. But I have to say that the fear that was generated at that particular moment in time was like nothing I had ever experienced before. And I've been involved in paranormal research, as you rightly stated there, for 30 years. But since doing and getting involved with the mythology and folklore of the island, I've had more experiences with that than I've had over the last 30 years.
So the fear being just way out of whack, just way out of proportion for what was going on?
Way out of proportion. Completely out of proportion. And, looking back on it, to say that, well, you seen a pit and there were serpents, that in itself should not have made me afraid. But this was beyond even fearing for my life. This was excessive. It really triggered this fight or flight within me. Now, come the morning, I have to say, by the time Cormac had woken, I had the tent broken down, and both myself and the dog were in the boat waiting to go home. And I said to Cormac, if I ever experience that again, I'm done. I'm retiring. That's just too much.
Okay. Well, from that experience and the accumulated experiences you've had at haunted places, paranormal sites, supernatural kind of events and investigations you've done, you've formed this theory that's put into this book, The Deception of Gods and Men. Barry Fitzgerald, let's jump into some examples of the deception that you outline in this book. This Reverend Robert Kirk, the story you tell early in your book, who was he and what happened to him?
Well, Reverend Robert Kirk, he was an exceptionally intelligent man of 1682, and he was a member of the Scottish Methodist Church in Aberfoyle. It's a small village that's located near Stirling. And while in 1682, it's alleged that he had these meetings with these beings on Doon Hill. Now, the Doon Hill is still very much there. It's still very much part of the village, and people still go there to try and commune with these things. And bear in mind that the story that I'm about to tell you is just simply a mask in which they interact with us. So Reverend Kirk was there, and he became entwined with this two-sided story that we spoke about before, about the fact that there were warring factions within it. And essentially what he was dealing with was the fairy. And from the Scotch perspective, they call them the Seelie. And within that, there were two factions, the Seelie, who in themselves loved the human race, same old nonsense that they keep telling us. They love the human race, and all they require is our adoration and help with fighting the other side, which is the Unseelie. And the Unseelie have a deep hatred for humanity. And it seems that Reverend Robert Kirk went above and beyond and tried to bring peace back to the Seelie and the Unseelie. And unfortunately, it cost him life. He ends up getting involved in situations that he was told either that he could come with them and stay in their realm, or he would be killed. So that was two options. And they found his body on the hillside, and they believed he had died of a heart attack. Some had said it was possibly a changeling that was left. Either way, his body was interred in the local church. And it was believed that at a certain time that he would return to. It was during a wedding ceremony, and he said, "When I return, please throw the iron dagger, because that will mean that he can return and the spell will be broken. Otherwise, he would be lost forever." Now, he did make his appearance during the wedding party, but instead of people throwing the dagger, they were left dumbfounded because they knew he had died, and yet there he was standing. No one thought to throw the dagger, and he disappeared and was gone for eternity. So that's the story of Reverend Robert Kirk, and he left a diary behind, and that diary in itself is called Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, and it describes his journeys and dealings with these particular creatures.
And people would hear that now and say, elves and fairies, come on, what is this, Tolkien? It's J.R.R. Tolkien or something like that? They're not real, elves and fairies. You make the point that, as Jacques Vallée has, as John Keel did, that over the centuries, these are the same kind of entities, just in different forms and different names.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt. I've had my own experiences with them as well.
Wait a second. Tell us, what was that? What happened?
I was on a mount, or a hill here in Sligo, on the west of Ireland, and I was staying on top of an old passage chamber. It's a Neolithic passage chamber that was built just before the Great Pyramids of Giza. And just at the turn of nightfall, that's when these people, for all intents and purposes, they appear. They're not like what Disney would associate little tiny creatures with wings and things like that. They're certainly not at all. They portray themselves as being very much like us in our appearance. And they were walking away. Now, this is where I got an insight into the phenomenon itself, in that when they appeared, I could clearly see two walking away from me. And when I lifted the camera to take a photograph, because it was odd that they were walking through a flock of sheep and the sheep didn't move, I thought that's unusual, because if I moved toward the sheep, they would break apart. And I took the photograph, and the camera only saw one, yet clearly I could see two. And I thought maybe it's double vision. But then I realized that one was slightly shorter than the other and was wearing a slightly different color of blue jacket.
So it's two, it's not one, yeah.
It was definitely two. At least that's what they were portraying. And that let me understand the phenomenon from a camera perspective. The reason that this phenomenon does not like cameras is because it sees what's there, not what they want us to see. And that really set the grounding then for the way forward in understanding the phenomenon.
As you dig into folklore, mythology, stories, folk stories in Ireland, Scotland, the UK, you notice that the good beings, the good fairy, and the bad ones all do the same stuff. They come and take us in the middle of the night against our will to some unknown place and do what they will. But essentially, the good and the bad do the same things. And it's not just these entities; it's throughout supernatural and paranormal phenomena.
Very, very much so. Really, whenever culturally, when we look at the various different ways that we would interpret them, we see that the phenomena remains the same underneath.
So angels and fallen angels versus demons. The good
Angels
ones, the
demons,
good, the good angels are here to help us and protect us, right?
That's another perfect example of the story. And a lot of people wouldn't like to hear that angels didn't exist before 584 BC. So the big question is, well, if they didn't exist before then, what are we calling on now? And that in itself, the book really draws out some very uncomfortable things that we need to consider about what we perceived things to be, how they wanted to be perceived, and how they hid their I suppose their tendencies within those masks.
Your theme, though, is that it's a false dichotomy. The angels as our protectors, as examples to be good, are setting this up when they're really working in conjunction with the bad.
It's all of the same coin. As I said before, it's two faces of the same coin. And when we go back and we look at devils and angels, that's exactly what they are. The fallen angels. What are they? They're angels. They're the same coin, just two different faces.
And you delve into modern ufology, our perception of these beings of light, the Anunnaki, or versus the little grays who abduct us, but they're healing us. They take us on board ships and they heal us and they really care about us. Versus the reptilians who are really evil and want to do us harm. Basically the same thing. They're both the same, different sides of the same coin.
It's an uncomfortable truth. They're the same thing. There's another connection that we tend to see as well, and it's not readily spoke about within ufology. But we tend to see it more within the realm of the earth spirits, the jinn and the old gods. It's their aversion to iron. The Greys hate iron, along with the earth spirits, along with the jinn and the old gods.
Now, why would that be?
They all are afraid of it because they can't shut us down. And I've had first-hand experiences of that myself with the Greys and their aversion to iron. And I suppose to understand it, we have to understand the magnetic field is produced by the body itself. And understand that when iron is introduced to a magnetic field, it promotes the magnetic field, it strengthens the magnetic field, it becomes a lot stronger. Now, when we go back and we start looking at these particular beings and when they come to us in the middle of the night and do what they do, then we have to begin to look at our own biology and understand what is happening there, because a lot of these things will attack when our iron counts are low, and many have become anemic. For instance, the incubus and succubus, 9 times out of 10, they'll attack women over men. They'll attack when they become anemic. And so they wait for the iron to lower. But when you're wearing iron or you have a higher iron count in your system, they tend to stay the hell away from you.
I guess the big question then, the obvious question is, what are they doing? What's the game? What are they after? Why do they need us? Why would they go through this drama of pretending to be good and protecting us from evil? Why deceive us at all?
That's the old hook and bait. And that's the way that they manage to connect to us, is through the hook and bait. And that in itself, I suppose, I heard recently one person making a remark. I can't remember who it was now just offhand, but I remember them saying, those who have the body win. And that is very, very prevalent with this particular phenomena, and that the end game is to try and hold on and use you as an anchor, so that they do not return to that void from which they came.
Eventually, we're going to have to get into the other part of your thesis, is that the afterlife does not exist, that it's all made up by them to deceive us, presumably to keep our minds active and not paying attention to what the ultimate game plan is. Is that right?
There is some things that we need to consider when looking at this particular phenomena and how they fool us. But to do that, we have to understand our own trinity, our own sacred trinity of the body itself. The fact that, you see, it becomes cloudy within today's world because we use the terms soul and spirit and we find it interchangeable. But that was never the case. Going back through the old manuscripts and things, they were two separate entities, where today we have joined them as one. And to recognize that again, I think is very, very important, and to understand that the soul's responsibility was to make sure that this meat suit, the body, stays alive as long as possible, so that the spirit can experience, and primarily. This then really lets us delve into the area of the psychic, and the idea that as we propose in the book, that all psychic phenomena is the actions of the soul. It's that keeps the body alive as long as possible. Wow. When the body ends up in a situation, for instance, where this phenomena tries to latch on after that particular experience, sometimes people can find it very overwhelming, and they'll develop certain psychic abilities, prophetic of nature somewhat, and they believe that they're gifts from this experience. That is not what we put through in this book. What we are proposing is that is a responsibility of the soul. It is the soul that is stepping forward to the plate to make sure and try and make sure that does not happen again.
You make the argument in many parts of the book that we really don't know what these things look like. You know, the Greys, ETs, the reptilians. You know, there are screen memories. They assume different shapes. They look like owls with big eyes to us, or deer with big eyes. And what we remember may not be what we saw. We also know that the UFOs themselves, which we assume is some kind of technology, that they change shapes. They appear, they disappear, they split apart, they mold together. They seem to be immune to what we understand the laws of physics to be, that they are, in fact, shapeshifters as well. So we really don't know what any of these beings or entities look like.
Well, that is the truth of the matter. And that's why within the book we don't use names per se, because names are preloaded. And the use of demon, fairy, and stuff like that, we stay away from. There's an introduction to them, but we stay away from for the main part, because there is no identity behind them. They come from a place of absolute nothing, and we see that through the likes of the Skull experiment, which was conducted back in the 1990s in England. It was a 5-year study into the world of the beyond and what was coming through it, and we see it in other aspects as well. For instance, Robert Monroe, during his experiences as well, he comes across this particular phenomena and mentions it in some of his work. But for the main part, yes, they don't tend to have a physical form per se. That's how we perceive them. That's how they wish to be perceived, and that in itself comes from this understanding that during the first 20 seconds is vital when this contact is made, because within the first 20 seconds, the truth of the nature is usually given to us by our own soul. And that is delivered through the body's response. So with the first 20 seconds, we tend to detect whether this is right or whether this is wrong. But if it overrides more than 20 seconds, that system can be overridden by them, primarily because we're forced into the theta brain rhythm. And that particular brain rhythm is where we tend to do a lot of daydreaming. It's where hypnotic suggestion can be made. It's where meditation happens. It's also where false memories can be planted. So the body is being forced into theta. And that in itself has been a real eye-opener to come across. I'm still going through some of the paperwork from European scientists at the moment in which they were seeing
Hello?
Phenomena across Europe.
Okay. When you and I first met, Barry, when we first met, it was to talk about hotspots. I was sharing with you some of the notes about Skinwalker Ranch and asking you and Steve Mera about hotspots that you had investigated, places where there's a cornucopia of weird stuff, all kinds of strange phenomena, all happening in the same place. And the assumption was, I think, at Skinwalker, for example, as at places you investigated, that these are all different phenomena that happen to occur in the same spot. In fact, you suspect that they are all the same phenomena, just showing in different forms.
Yes, we do. We're now following that particular line of investigation. And the magnetic hotspots, they're not huge by any mean, but what we are able to see is that these particular areas tend to resonate this particular type of phenomena greater than others. Now, when we start looking at this, for instance, the Scottish Seelie and Unseelie, let's say, the Seelie, the ones who want our adoration and all that stuff, tend to happen primarily within the positive magnetic anomalies. Now, bear in mind, the same phenomena appears in both sides of the scale. We tend to find the abduction, the mutilation, the UFOs, the cryptids. They tend to primarily appear around these particular areas. Skinwalker Ranch, as you rightly stated, is one of those areas.
We're talking with Barry Fitzgerald, who thinks there is no ultimate battle between good versus evil, that it's a false construct. There are no differences between angels and demons, since they both play for the same team. And he thinks the belief in an afterlife is a cruel hoax, manipulated in a grand deception rolled out by these entities that have lived among us and always have been here on Earth, that we're not going to heaven, we're not going to hell. It's a cruel joke. He's going to make the case, tell us why that's how he believes. Barry Fitzgerald, in the book, The Deception of Gods and Men, you rely on the skull experiments to buttress the case that you make. Can you tell us, for those of us who don't know much about it, can you describe what it was? You said it lasted 5 years, and there were some really strange experiences that you describe in your book. Describe the focus of the study, the kinds of things that they experienced, and what you draw out of that?
Sure. The Skull experiment was conducted in the village of Skull, which is on the eastern shores of the UK. And it was during the 1990s, over a 5-year period, that the experiments were held, which was a sitting of seance twice a week. And during this seance, there were items that would manifest into the seance room, and it acquired such attention that there was a line of scientists wanted to be involved to witness this and experience it for themselves, and they did, I have to say. There were things like objects would materialize within the room during these seance sittings. And one in particular was very, very interesting and very prophetic, I suppose, to my own work, when we consider that one of the beings that made itself known was a grey alien. Now, during the video presentation in which it appeared initially, it appeared in a blue hue on the TV screen. But because of that, it became known as Blue, the entity Blue. Nonetheless, it was a grey alien. And some of the other things that would have happened, there were parts of the body that would materialize. For instance, sitters to feel this hand touch them on the shoulder, and they would be able to feel the hand, the cold nature of the hand, and follow the hand onto the wrist, into the lower arm, into the elbow, and there was nothing above it. There was just this part of the body materialized. So all this phenomena was materializing itself within the seance room, including this doorway that seemed to fluctuate and ripple within part of the basement where the seances were happening. Now, as I said, this happened for over a 5-year period. The details of the book of the encounters by Robin Foy is tremendous and very, very interesting when we consider that in the later aspects of the communications and the information that was being passed from the void, that we started to see this element of deception begin to appear. Now, one of the entities that came through was known as Sharoness, and that happened on March the 6th, 1998, when this entity came through and said and claimed it came from a dimension of nothingness. Now, this is also something that Robert Monroe had also experienced. This aspect of this. It was almost like a water of darkness that he would pass over during his out-of-body experiences. And he commented that there were things in the water that had a certain intelligence, almost a tribal intelligence, but sometimes would follow him back into here and now, which, of course, would open up the problems. But the skull experiment itself was vital in understanding a lot of this particular phenomenon. And that in itself allowed us to understand the nature of the soul that each of us have, and this idea that when the soul returns to the void, it brings back this aspect of the knowledge that was gained through the life here and now, and that itself, it collects into this what we today know as the global consciousness, and Edgar Cayce referred to it as the Akashic records. Now, each of us have the ability to access this particular area, and by using this perfected balance that we can attain within the trinity of ourselves, the body, spirit, and the soul. And from the pages of Opera Omnia, the texts speak of a power, the power a balanced soul has, and states actually that demons are afraid of a balanced soul, because the soul was there to protect the Trinity. And that in itself was exceptionally interesting to understand. Now, the soul, I should reiterate as well that the soul's job was to keep the body alive as long as possible. But, and this is something we have to recognize, it thrived in our lowest energies, and it dealt with our wants, our needs, and our lusts. So we had to curtail it. We had to find balance within that. And because if it became unbalanced, it created all sorts of problems. But yeah, so that's what the skull experiment was about. It was about communicating with the other side to try and gain information and knowledge from the other side to help us know what was possibly coming.
And in that communication, the other side being spirits, spiritual entities, where did they say they were from?
Yes, they said that they were spiritual entities. And again, this is where we have to take a step back from that, and we have to look at the phenomena itself and the way it interacted. So that in itself, it could be very, very damaging if we go full in to the skull experiment. It's, again, as I referred to earlier, the hook and bait. The problem is that when we start getting information from these particular means, and they can come across many various different ways. When we get information, for instance, they tell us 4 things that are wrong, but they'll tell us 1 thing that's right. We have this ability to ignore the 4 lies that have just been told, and we grab onto the one that has been told that is truthful. hook and bait. It is that thing that really it destroys the human race in its aspect that we completely ignore every other sense, and just acknowledge the fact that okay, everything else is ignore everything else. It's just told me a certain truth there, so it must be right. And that's what we see through, and it's not just the Skull experiment. We see this through all of the paranormal fields and the fringe fields as well. And that in itself is exceptionally damaging. We have to step back from that. And what I have found whenever I start to apply this inquisitive nature to the phenomena, it is absolutely amazing how the moment that you become suspicious of the phenomena, it hightails it out of there. The communication stops because we become suspicious of it.
That happened with the Skull experiment, right? It happened with the Skull experiment. Suddenly they said, we're out of here.
Yep, that was happening there as well. And the Skull experiment came to an end because they said they were getting interference from the future, and there was something coming back to interfere with the phenomena. And they said there will be no more communication from their spirit guides and the spirit team and everything else. But that was not the case, because later on, outside of the Skull experiment, communication was developed again with the spirit team. So again, that's where we see another lie that has happened. That alarm bell should be ringing, but instead we ignore it.
So these spirits on the other side, communicating with humans through the Skull experiments, telling these humans that they are on the other side, they're spirits. They appear, at least in one case, looking like a gray alien. It made me think of, and you mentioned Aleister Crowley in your book, remember you think of the demon that he called up, something demonic that he called up that looked just like a big-headed gray alien.
Yes, he did do that, all right. Aleister Crowley also felt or came victim as well to this idea that we could control it. And during one of the particular processes in I believe it was the Middle East, he had formed his safe area in which the spirit could manifest, and he would be safe. Instead, it stepped out over the circle and walked across and beat the living hell out of him. So there again was another lie that was placed in front of him, and he failed to see it. This idea that we were safe with it. It really is. It is something that within the book I really try and harness. That we need to get back to who we are. We need to start listening to our instincts and understanding what this phenomena is.
You know, not to get off on a tangent here, but Bob Lazar, I know a lot of people have different thoughts about his credibility and everything, but one of the reports he said he read when he worked out there was about the soul, that the aliens or these beings saw us as containers, and presumably containers of souls. That's why they were here. That's what they're interested in.
Yes. I can sympathize with that, because as I said earlier, he who wins the body he who has the body wins. Their idea that they want to come back to here, let's face it, as the Skull experiment showed us, that they came from a dimension of nothingness, which in itself is exceptionally close to us. That dimension is very, very close to us here and now. So they want to come back. This aspect of the soul wants to come back and stay here as long as possible.
And these beings, these spirits, have they always been here? Always longer than us?
I have to say, when we're identifying, we shouldn't call them spirits. I see them more as soul shadow. There's two phrases there that I would use: soul and shadow. The spirit is gone. At moment of death, the spirit is gone. We do not have communication with the spirit anymore. It's gone. What we are communicating with in all our Ouija board experiments, within the UFO experiences and everything else, is the soul. That's what we are communicating with, not the spirit. It's a very different part of us altogether, and it is gone at point of death.
So no afterlife.
Oh no, I'm definitely not saying that. The soul, or sorry, the spirit goes somewhere. But it's interesting that when we go back far enough, and for instance, if we go back to the Norse traditions, who themselves adapted those traditions from people within Syria and within the Fertile Crescent. They were the people who were building these passage chambers, these stone mounds that appear across Europe and also appear here in Ireland. Now, I have mentioned them earlier whenever I said that I saw these two particular bodies walking away from me, which in Irish tradition we would call them the fairy. Here we also call them the she. Now, that in itself is probably a wrong term, because when we consider the she are the mounds, the stone mounds in which these things came through. Those were the places, those were the liminal places that our ancestors, the Neolithic, went to communicate with them. And it is these places, these stone constructs, that we tend to find these particular doorways that activate at certain times of the year. And for us on that particular standing, this tie-in with stone is very, very important. And when we consider the likes of David Paulides and his work in Missing 411, he has also commented that the majority of people disappear, and I might add that they also disappear within heightened magnetic anomalies. The majority of people disappear in boulder fields. We're back to stone. And when we look then at the idea of the fairy aspect, within England you have a particular entity known as a goblin. Now, in itself, we laugh about the idea, we think it's hilarious. But goblin himself originates from the old French gobelin, which originates from the old Germanic kob, which means hole in stone. This is something that's coming from the rocks. And this is something that we tend to find a lot of, that these particular appearances, especially for the shining ones, we touched on them earlier, the Anunnaki and things there. These shining ones appear around boulder fields. They'll appear in caves. They'll appear on stone plateaus. And those are my nemesis, I have to say. I have a real thing against them. And they come forward and they tell us about all this stuff that's happening and how we need to be better and all the rest. It's all rubbish. Because within the first 20 seconds, we have to understand the signals from our body. And more times than not, our body is screaming at us to get the hell out of there, because it's not what we perceive it to be.
What's your take on what? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Our soul is indicating to us the nature of that particular phenomena, and that bleeds through into our fight or flight. That's when our body kicks in, and before that, when the body kickstarts the fight or flight, we should be listening to that. The hair stands up in the back of our necks. We should be leaving that area. Instead, they hook and bait us, and that's where we stop, and we're paralyzed with fear. And the likes of various different appearances of the Shining Ones happen right across the planet. And Europe, of course, is no exception. The likes of Medjugorje in 1981, 6 children saw this aspect of Our Lady appear. And we have to be very, very careful about the use of lady on these particular terms, because a lot of these stories and encounters have been smoothed out over time, and the real details are within the first 20 seconds. The children that seen the entity at Medjugorje in 1981, they were frozen with fear. That speaks volumes. Our bodies are screaming to us, get away from here. But instead, within the first 20 seconds, it overrides it. And that's whenever it forces us into the theta rhythm. Lourdes is another example. 1858, St. Bernadette saw this entity within the cave, another rock face, in France. Now, bear in mind that this was overridden and smoothed out because the references to Our Lady didn't appear until later. Bernadette herself admitted that when she referred to the entity, she referred to it as that thing. Now, again, it speaks volumes of what these things are within the first 20 seconds. Our bodies, our instincts, our psychic, if you like, are all interpretations of the soul. It's how the soul interprets the environment around us. And our soul speaks to us through the reactions of the body. And it's how we interpret that and how we move that forward and how we can defeat the phenomena in the way that it wants to interact with us.
Our senses can be manipulated and deceived, sight and sound and smell, things of that sort, but our innate sense often alerts us, even though our eyes are telling us something different. We're talking with Barry Fitzgerald. Barry, in the next segment, I want to talk to you about a book that I think I read, has to be 30 years ago, called Gods of Eden, which had the premise that these entities have manipulated humanity on a massive scale, causing war and suffering and death, millions and millions of people. I want to ask you about your thoughts on that.
Well, I have to say, George, I've never read the book, and it's my first time of hearing about it. But for me to understand this particular phenomena, which relates to that particular book, I started pulling on information from the Marian Library, which is an International Marian Research Institute in Dayton, Ohio. And that in itself, I started to look at this aspect of the Shining Ones, which we spoke about before the break. Who are they? Where are they coming from? Now, the Guardian newspaper on March the 11th, 2017, ran a headline, "The 1930s were humanity's darkest and bloodiest hour. Are you paying attention?" Well, that actually wasn't quite right. Because what we tended to find within our research is that a decade before war breaks out, major war, their appearance in negative magnetic anomalies outnumber all others. So 10 years before a major war breaks out, we tend to see an influx of these particular Marian apparitions. These shining ones appear around the world. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Bosnian War, the global war on terrorism, they all made their appearance. Now, what does that mean? You know, from our aspect and our understanding of this particular phenomena, we then started to see another pattern, because our attention then was drawn to the negative magnetic anomalies. These are the places where we tended to find, again, the typical poltergeist activity, UFO mutilations, cryptid encounters, and all the rest. But there was a difference here within the negative magnetic anomalies. It was a different kettle of fish. This place is where you tended to find a majority of sacrificial worship from our ancestors in the past. A blood worship, if you like, that spilling of blood was huge in these particular areas. Now, initially, I came across some research which made me pay attention, but not enough at the time. But it came back into it later on, because 75% of the world's top suicide locations appear in negative anomalies. What is it that's pulling people, drawing people to these locations to end their lives? That certainly is not a positive outcome. But it was also interesting that when we started looking at the negative anomalies in more detail, 70% of the world's weapons development labs and storage areas are also found in these areas. And that seemed to that then itself didn't seem to come across by chance. And you know, this idea that we can communicate with these things is nothing new. Because there were areas within the past, there were hard to reach areas that were known as places of oracle that I spoke about earlier, that island of the dead. It was a place where you could make a pilgrimage to ask assistance of this spiritual interpreter. And you either slept on the location or you had communication from the other side via an intermediary. Now, these particular practices originated within the Near East, countries such as Syria and things like that. And like, as I said before, the movement of the passage chambers went right across Northern Europe into the British Isles, where we find them today. And when you went to these areas, if we look at the Greek perspective, for instance, there was a god that we would know as Pan, this horned, hoofed deity that would appear within these areas. But that wasn't the one I was interested in. interested were this phenomena that was known as the Word. This phenomena is the one that came through, and we're giving guidelines to our elite, to our rulers, to our priests on how to rule us through sociology, government, economics, warfare, crime, medicine, engineering, and science. The information was coming back through these particular channels. And that was during the Greek times. We're talking before Christianity and things like that. And to find that then starting to slip through into the mainstream, because it's not only the paranormal, the people that are investigating the paranormal and things like that end up in these places channeling. And we might sneer at the idea that, well, channeling, it's just people having a bit of a laugh in the background. That's not the case. Scientists and engineers have been using channeling today in this modern age to get ahead of the current technological challenges. That's a tongue twister. An instance of that, I can let you know, comes from Douglas Aeronautics in 1968, before being absorbed into Boeing in 1987. They were trying to make contact with this particular being, to try and get ahead of current engine designs from so-called aliens. That in itself was absolutely phenomenal to come across, to have the paperwork that shows that they were getting funding to follow this particular Ouija board session to channel information about engine design. This is not something that happens in your basement. This is something that was also happening at a higher level to try and get ahead. And as I said earlier, in the Christianity, we were certainly going to these areas, these key areas, these liminal places in which information was being passed from these things on how to govern us.
We've had conversations in years past, Barry, about hotspots, paranormal hotspots, UFO hotspots, places where a lot of different kinds of phenomena spill over into each other. And you've noticed you've noticed trends, commonalities between these hotspots. Some of them, in terms of elements that are in the soil. Others, I think you mentioned in this book that some of these places have already been picked out by religions, where they build temples, where they build churches, and things of that sort. It's not a coincidence that they pick those places.
Absolutely, absolutely, and a lot of this goes back thousands of years. This is how we were able to track it. It goes back thousands of years. Now, there were unconfirmed reports that suggest that Carl Jung spoke to a delegation of U.S. military when addressing the UFO phenomena. He stated, "We may be looking at a mass Babylonian death ritual." Now, that of course is unconfirmed. I can't support that. I can just reference it. But it is interesting that after the Douglas fiasco of channeling for the UFO engine designs, Boeing, of course, took them in, and a rival firm also went on to develop an AI weapons platform, which is in use today, which is called Astarte, possibly a nod to the Mesopotamian goddess of war, Astarte. So again, the information is there. We can see it, and possibly the references, the nods to its longevity goes all the way back to Babylon, and that's where we lose it. There is no written text after that. So as far as we can go is back to the Fertile Crescent, and then that's it. We lose it beyond then.
Well, let's stick with that point for a moment in the UFO realm. There have been some pretty interesting studies done by folks, Bass, OSAP, passed on to ATIP, about the consequences of people who have close encounters, physical damage that as a result, radiation burns, things of that sort, because they're exposed to technology. Now, you wouldn't think that spirits, elementals, would need technology. So how do you reconcile that, how they would use technology, including AI, as part of the grand deception?
Well, that's where it gets complicated, because we have to revert back to this knowing that 70% of our weapons platforms and weapons development also originate within negative passage or negative magnetic anomalies, because there's a distinct difference between the original phenomena pre-19th century and what comes after that. And what comes after that, what I'm seeing anyway from my perspective, is a much higher output on electromagnetic frequencies that could be interpreted, of course, as weapons, if you like, and used and tested out on humanity. And that's where it gets very, very complicated, because we live in a society now where our technology essentially is somewhat better than the original, and it becomes very clouded when we have interactions with them and we have interactions with our own technology. And I tend not to get involved with our own technology because that's dark enough as it is, and my focus was primarily on what is coming through the void, more so than what we have made contact with to advance our situation within the global platform and beyond. So so it gets very complicated and very murky when we start delving into and start splitting the original phenomena from the new phenomena, the likes of our it interfering with our technology, with it shutting down our bodily systems, and what comes out of that, of course, and of course, being shot with lasers is not a fun thing either, so all of this phenomena, in the modern sense, we can find the patents for within the U.S. Patent Office. The technology is there, whether we like to accept it or not. The technology is there, has been known about for a long time, and I think we're seeing that within the technology that we are building. But that again is another subject, I feel, and I primarily deal with those of the ancient past.
But you think that they could also adapt technology to carry out their ends?
I find that they have problems developing technology per se. The way that they interact with us has never really changed. So they're exceptionally slow at adapting. And I think part of that as well may be from where they're coming from. And this idea that we have of time, for us, of course, time is linear. But for them, it's somewhat different. And we have many different tales within their mythology and folklore that speak of time operating differently when the victim is taken across. And we're told that maybe only 5 minutes could turn out to be 3 hours, or a day could turn out to be 50 years back here on Earth. So for them to come through and make their appearance, and then disappear back beyond the veil for, say, maybe half a day, you could be looking at 100 years that could have passed in between. So for them, time hasn't changed, which again shows itself within the phenomenon which it interacts with us. It hasn't really changed over the millennia. The technology that we are building is advancing at leaps and bounds, that in itself is far out surpassing what they are able to come up with.
Yeah, well, if they can manipulate us on a mass scale, as you say they have demonstrated over the centuries, they can just rely on us to make the technology and to carry out their ends.
Absolutely, yeah, very much so. And there was a lot of promise given to those powers that be of power, wealth, and greed, and that is the Achilles heel of the human race, and that is something we will never change from.
Meaning that we will always fall for that. They dangle some riches in front of our face, and they'll get some of us to do whatever they want.
Unfortunately, that is the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's the sad news, I'm afraid.
I don't imagine this book is going to be all that popular with churches, with organized religion.
I would imagine not. The idea that when the soul, the spirit leaves, and the spirit, I didn't really delve too much within this aspect of the spirit per se, but there have been associations with the Old Norse traditions, pre-Christian, which appear to resonate with the idea of the river Styx, for instance, the idea that the dead crossed this body of dark water to reach the other shore, and when this spirit crossed to this other place, they went over this bridge, and they crossed through a gate into this particular area that was known as a real place of beauty, of rich green landscapes, which today we would see as heaven. There have been instances of out of body experiences where people come back and say, "Well, this is what I saw," and they walked through a gate, and there was people on the other side, and there was all beauty and everything else. In the Old Norse traditions, that place existed, and you went through the gates, you got to the other side, and there were people there. That was a place of transit. That's where you met your friends and relatives and everything else, and then you went to where you were meant to go. But this is where it gets complicated and becomes an inconvenient truth, because that place was known as hell. And Saxo Grammaticus, he was a Danish historian from 1160 to 1220 AD. He describes hell as a place of beauty, replete with the green landscapes of late spring. It was a place in total contrast to the later Christian depictions of evil, darkness, and treachery, which were absorbed through the Greek traditions of Hades, and those, and really driven home after the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century.
Barry, I know that from your research in the UFO area, you're familiar with the recent findings, and it's almost a trend where people, respected authorities, people who've been around this subject for a long time, will say that these ETs, these aliens, whatever they are, wherever they're from, have been healing humans. They help us. They have our interests at heart. They take us on board their ships. They heal ills and illnesses, things of that sort, wounds. They really have are watching out for us. Is it possible that some of that is real? That there actually are ETs? I don't see how they could be mutually exclusive from the entities that you're describing.
Some of the encounters can have positive outcomes. That is for sure. But when we start looking at the whole thing as a whole, that's whenever we start to see, like as before we indicated, the same phenomena of the same, or the different faces of the phenomena but the same coin. In the 1970s, there were a series of experiments that were conducted by the University of Indiana, and they devised to make contact with UFOs using what we would know today as beaming lights into the sky. This wish to make contact with the UFO phenomena, and they established the primary contact with these lights that flash back and everything else, but they just didn't understand the phenomena itself. They didn't understand their body's reaction to it either. Now, this was prior to today's CE5 establishments and everything else. But the events that followed, they really reflected the findings of other scientific investigations by the Livermore laboratories in the United States, described by Russell Targ. And as the experiments continued, the students began to experience these strange, hollow, rapping sounds, disembodied voices, furious poundings in the walls, and physical attacks by these unseen entities. And this went on and on and on. And in itself, the very, very similar phenomena began to happen within the Livermore laboratories, in which led to the abandonment of the experiment because of its very nature. Now, that in itself, of course, is just a slight overview of where we see this commonality coming down through us. And some of the encounters, as I say, have been positive in nature, but the problem is that the phenomena itself is very, very hard to determine whether you're contacting the positive outcome or the negative outcome. And I think Dr. Bob Curran, he's a fellow researcher here from Northern Ireland. In his conclusion in his book, Dark Fairies, he sums up the real threat behind many of these sweet images that we have of fairies. The idea of a kindly fairy helping out a distressed human is something of a myth. Indeed, in many cases, they were feared and avoided if possible. And that sums it up beautifully.
So is there, in Vallée, Jacques Vallée, his passport to Magonia, he came up with the idea, along with John Keel, the idea that these same beings that we describe today as aliens or ETs are essentially the same as elves, fairies, goblins, creatures of folklore that were described centuries ago. Your idea takes it a step further, that we were probably closer to the truth the first time around, that, yeah, they are the same things, but they're closer to the elementals than they are to ETs.
They're not even close to the elementals. The ETs, the elementals, all that are just masks of the phenomena. We have to strip the mask away to look at the phenomena itself, the way it interacts with us. And within that, we can find what we're actually looking at. And that in itself, to understand that, we have to look at the entire umbrella. And we can't just nitpick. We have to look at it all. And when we do that, and we work together, and this is an important thing, the field as a whole needs to work together. We can no longer pigeonhole the phenomena and say, well, this belongs to here and this belongs to there. That is not the case. What we're seeing is this common factor that weaves its way through it all. And the way that it interacts with us speaks volumes, especially when we start using cameras. Because the original phenomena, and I'm talking pre-19th century, that phenomena still occurs today. But when we bring a camera to the location, recording equipment to the location, 9 times out of 10, they will not take part in the experiment. And a lot of times, even if we secretly hide the camera, that can have a negative effect as well, because they interpret what we think. They're able to get into our thought processes and understand that. We try and outsmart them. They are already one step ahead because they read what we are doing. They read what we think. The impulse that we have is detectable by them. There are processes, however, in which you can hide that. And that brings us back into an esoteric path. And to understand this phenomena, we have to understand it from an esoteric path. And that in itself leads us into another area altogether. A lot of the phenomena, in fact, the majority of the phenomena, in its truest sense, can be manifested. And that in itself, call it what you want, it is an esoteric occult practice. And that has been used by our ancients for thousands of years.
I know that bringing it back, I don't hate to keep reminding, bringing it back to Skinwalker, but, those teams, 3 different groups of investigators at that ranch all say the same thing, that no matter what they try to do, this phenomena, this intelligence can always figure it out. They're always one step ahead. Same thing. They also say that, a lot of the people who've been there have what they call hitchhikers. They bring something home with them. It's an attachment. You have been at these kinds of places all over the world, ghosts, hauntings, UFO sites, cryptid creatures, all that. Have you ever taken something home, and how do you explain that?
Following my escapade on the Island of the Dead, I returned back home, and I was sitting in the lounge with my wife, and the fire was lit. And I was just documenting my experiences on the laptop. And both of us were facing the door that was open in the hallway. On the door, it was a glass door. Both of us looked up remarkably at the same time. And standing in the hallway was a dark shadow looking at us, standing in the hallway. And it was looking at us as we were sitting, looking at it. And within the space of a second and a half, it was gone. And I got up to give chase, but it was gone. But yes, there is the potential to bring things back. You know, there was a series of experiments that were conducted some time ago, maybe 10 years ago, EVP experiments. And these experiments went right around the world. And the same question was being asked time and time again. How do you see us? And it kept coming back as light. Now, that didn't correlate with me whenever I was writing the book, The Influence, because whenever I initially began that project, I was given this warning at the very beginning, which I included in the book. Don't become too bright or they see you. And that really, really hit home when the EVP experiments were conducted and they said, how do you see us as light? So that in itself spoke volumes to me and about how we can bright lights attract flies. And we can do that, and that can be a problem sometimes, and that's something we have to look about exploring. How do we remove them? And there, of course, there are areas in which religious areas which will look at that on how to remove attachments and things there. But there are other areas as well that we can also look at.
Yeah, some of the people who have these hitchhikers from Skinwalker have had them for a decade.
Yeah. They can stay for a long time because they need the hook. They need to be able to bait you and attach and hang on. Because if they don't have an attachment initially, if they don't have an attachment to us in whatever form, they are returned back to that void, that place of nothingness. And so they need to try and attach to us whatever way possible. And through that, of course, is the hook and bait, the deception. The idea that vibration can get us through to that other realm is very, very important. When you're looking at sympathetic resonance frequencies, that's very, very important. But the Celts themselves didn't come up with that. The Celts came to this island around 500 BC, and they inherited the island from who was here before, and those before were inheriting the island from the Neolithic. So there's always been cultures and belief systems brought onto this island, but a lot of them were based around frequency. And you're right, there are certain frequencies, of course, which are very, very important. Halloween was something that was born here in Ireland and went to the four corners of the world. We call it Samhain. And during Halloween, there are particular practices in which we can go to the birthplace of Halloween, which is down in County Meath. And as a populace, we can all take part in that ceremony in which the grouping of people are split into two, and we start producing this rhythmic vibration, which in itself, even now thinking about it, gives me goosebumps. It really is something quite bizarre and out there from the Celtic traditions that calls back our ancestors. And it originated at that place in County Meath. So vibration is exceptionally important. And understanding that sympathetic resonance frequency opens the doorway to the other place, the place where we get the information.
Barry, my grandmother was Irish, and I have relatives there. I've never been, have planned it a couple of times, and it's fallen through. But I sometimes wonder if that is where my appreciation for these subjects comes from. It's something in the Irish DNA.
There is something in that, I have to say, and I went through my own DNA analysis to find out where does this meat suit come from, and I was very happy to see that over 50% was Celtic, part of it was belonged to the Nordic regions, and part of it Greek, and I said, well, I am exactly where I'm meant to be. And it really was one of those binding factors to this land. And you go through life wondering, is there anything else that I could be doing? But I'm exactly where I'm meant to be,
yeah.
And that was proven through that analysis. It all comes down to choice. We have a choice, and it's although sometimes the choice may seem somewhat obscure, there is always a choice there, and we can make that choice to do good, or we can make the choice to do bad. we can decide, okay, well, what they're telling me, I can follow the direction and gain all the wealth that I need and power and everything else, and more to boot. All I have to do is turn my back on humanity and stand on those in the lower echelons. But we have a choice. We can turn away from that, and it always comes down to choices.
Do you know about the Archons, Barry?
The Archons, yeah. Now, of course, within common school of thought, the Archons came from space and came down and started to rule the human race. But the traditional use of the word Archon from the scripts identify Archon as being someone of foreign stature. And that particular address and use of the word Archon was usually derived to a Roman ambassador, someone who was ruling that particular area at the time that those ancient scripts were being written about. And that has been convoluted and distorted through time. To now, we see the Archons as being something which is outside the planet and is governing the human race. Well, that initially, that use of the word was not meant for that particular purpose. It was destined for a more down to earth address of a ruler of a foreign land.
Oh.
I refer back to the research that we've done to show that 70% of weapons manufacturing and development happen in negative magnetic anomalies, the places where we went to meet these deities. The idea that we have a defense against it, yes, we do. And that in itself, as I indicated before, that transference of information comes through the soul and manifests in the body. When our souls pick up, our souls or shadow, when it picks up that what we're being told or what we're encountering is not what it portrays itself to be, what tends to happen is that our fight or flight engages. Now, this may not be a visual representation. It can be something that you sense that will kickstart your fight or flight. Now, unfortunately today, that fight or flight response can be affected by what we eat. And in particular, refined sugar can shut down our fight or flight. Now, as a species, we have started consuming copious amounts of refined sugar. So if we start addressing that and start pulling back on that and understand when the hair stands up in the back of our neck, when the adrenaline starts kicking in, there's something there to pay attention to. The idea of that we're walking through the woods, we get the sense we're being watched and we turn around, we can't see anything, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not being watched. And those are the signals that we really adopted from our times in the caves and things like that. And it's something that we should be connecting back to, but instead we're being turned off by that. And another aspect to that, of course, is our technology. When we're out, we continually have cell phones in our hand. We've got something else going on. There's always technology that locks us into the conscious brain, into the left-hand hemisphere of the brain. And that is serving to disconnect us from that aspect of the shadow, from that voice, and from those signals. So that's something we should be paying attention to as well. If we think that we're moving into something that's quite sketchy, set down the cell phone. Set down all that equipment that people are using with flashy lights and bells and whistles to try and communicate with the dead and everything else. Set it down. Listen to your instinct. That instinct speaks volumes. We have to start listening to it again.
We don't exactly know why they become concentrations of weirdness, with UFOs, orbs, ghosts, Bigfoot, crop circles, animal mutilations, places like Skinwalker Ranch. In truth, now there is a new alleged hotspot being investigated by some group, Skinwalker Ranch. We're going to find out what's going on there. Trey, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me, George. Top of the morning to you.
And to you. So tell me what it is. The story you tell about how this place was discovered is pretty entertaining. Why don't you start there?
Well, sure. Back in the 2000s, there was a hobby, and it still exists today, called geocaching, which is you basically lay in a series of coordinates into a website, and people go to these coordinates, find remote locations, and look for a log box or a log book or a box into the middle of the woods, sign the log, and it's just a way to get people outside and out in the environment and enjoying the outdoors. I was a member of a geocaching forum in the state in which I live, and we almost got into a point of one-upmanship. We were trying to create more and more elaborate geocaches, and I decided to do something with a little bit of an odd twist. I started researching folklore of a area here in the South, and I found a mention of a haunted road that went through a very remote nature preserve known as the Blackwater Nature Preserve. And supposedly this road was built over the top of an existing cemetery. And the folklore goes that if you drive on this road at night, the offended spirits who were encapsulated by the blacktop of this road would come up out of their graves and haunt you as you drove through the woods and beat on the side of your car and other strange things like that. It's just a really rich, folkloric tale. And I thought, well, that's really cool. What can I do with this? And I decided to put a geocache in the middle of this forest and design it in such a way that it could only be accessed at night. So you had to go to a particular set of coordinates in the middle of the woods at night, shine a high-powered flashlight around in a circle, and you would catch a small glint marker on a tree. Then you would move from your present point to that glint marker, shine your light around again, find another glint marker, and you would basically breadcrumb deep into the forest until you reached a certain pattern on a tree that indicated the terminus of these glint markers. The idea was at that time you would start searching for a hidden box, waterproof box in the woods that was about 30 feet from the end of this trail, and you would open it up, sign a log book, and if there were some trinkets in there, you could trade out, things like that. The catch was I didn't put any glint markers on the way back. So you had to make sure to waypoint or mark your vehicle in your GPS, or you'd stay out in the woods until daylight. So this obviously was a big success. People just, they loved the story. I took the original folklore and embellished it a bit, added a little bit more spice to the backstory. And people were coming from all over to find this waterproof box in the middle of the woods. And reviews started pouring in. And as I'm reading the reviews, enjoying, what people were saying about it, it was scary, spooky. I took my girlfriend out here, and we had a great time, et cetera, et cetera. One particular review caught my eye, and it was a gentleman that had gone out and found the geocache, had come back to his vehicle and decided he would explore a little bit in this area. And like I said, this is a very remote area, very, very dark, very remote, deep in the America South. And he had parked his car on the side of the road and was doing some exploring on foot. And while he was doing this, a truck pulled up and stopped and looked his way. And out of the truck came a large firearm pointing at this geocacher general direction. And the geocacher said, whoa, I'm, don't shoot. And the voice inside of the truck said, oh, my goodness, I thought you were, some sort of creature. And the geocacher said, oh, I'm sorry, I have two headlamps on my head, one red and one green. It must have looked really weird. And the local said, I thought you were some kind of monster or something out here in the woods. And here in the South we call them haints or boogers or something like that. And the geocacher explained, I'm just out here exploring, nothing nefarious, et cetera, et cetera. And the local said, well, that's all fine and good, but you really don't need to be out here at night. And the geocacher said, well, why is that? He said, well, this area is not real safe. Some weird things happen here. But whatever you do not go down County Road 1234. And I'll just go ahead and apologize to your listeners now. I've changed the names of a lot of locations in this book in order to keep the site as pristine as possible. So the names I'm using are fictitious names. But, don't go down County Road, 1234. So he posted his review on the forum. And, like any good, curious, inquisitive person, I read that. And the thing that jumps out of my mind is don't go down road 1234. Well, of course, what road do I immediately want to go down? 1234. Of course. Yeah, why would you not? And several years went on, and I was always looking for someone to accompany me, on this trip, on this expedition down to this, this strange, this strange area. It was just too good of a story not to pass up. And I've got a background of spending time in the woods. I was an Eagle Scout. I did the Philmont out New Mexico, and so any kind of outdoors experience, I was up for it. And back in 2015, I finally got a group together to go out there with me, and we found a campsite there in the Blackwater Nature Preserve called the Cold Springs Campsite. And while we were staying there in 2015, we had some odd things happen to us. There's an area called Stevens Lake. And as I was doing some research on the area prior to our trip, there were several MUFON reports about lights and odd things happening in Stevens Lake. And I've got a whole section of background on this area in the first part of the book. We decided that we would drive down to Stevens Lake. And during that time, we were driving down the very, very difficult, rutted, steep, inaccessible road to this lake. I had a strange sense of disorientation, and the best way I can describe it, it's almost like what cinematographers call a dolly zoom effect. That's where the main focus of your shot stays in focus, and you pull the camera dolly back and zoom in on the subject, and the background compresses. It sort of squeezes the background and elongates the visual perception. It's a very weird effect. And that happened to me while we were driving down Smith Lake. And I asked any of my cohort, did anybody experience this strange disorientation? And they said, well, no, we didn't. I said, well, it was very weird. It's past now. It could have just been we were on a very remote road, going down a steep angle at night, and it could have been a disorientation from, the surrounding steepness of the terrain, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't put much, put much into it. We got down to Smith's Lake, or Stevens Lake rather, and as we were exploring the shoreline, I asked my friends who's up ahead of me with a red headlamp on. And much to my surprise, all of my friends replied from my rear, no, we're all behind you. What are you talking about? And I had seen what appeared to be a red headlamp or red light bouncing through the forest, probably about 20 or 30 meters from us. We all turned on the white lights of our flashlights, shined them around, looking for somebody that might have been stalking us or a hiker or something like that, and nothing was to be found. Later on that trip back to our campsite, we returned. The driver saw a black, wispy shape dart across the road. And unfortunately, the rest of us were looking elsewhere when this happened. So we've already had several anomalous things happen during this first, outing to this region, this area. And we had the usual cars locking and unlocking and the failure of electronic equipment. And that pretty much wrapped up our weekend. Enough of these anomalous happenings certainly piqued our interest.
I wanted to ask you about your group, because as you described these different outings, what seemed remarkable to me, in a sense, when you deal with paranormal investigations, is that you didn't seem to have any crazy people. There are no egomaniacs that I could tell, and no real prima donnas who wanted all the attention or made stuff up.
No, absolutely. The folks, and especially in the Anomalous Studies and Observation Group Division, are all professional people. We have, varied backgrounds, everything from law enforcement backgrounds, retired law enforcement officers. We had a physicist. We have people with degrees from, you're familiar with the Georgia Institute of Technology.
Sure.
Very prestigious school. several paramedics, an emergency room nurse. We've got folks with backgrounds in special operations, military, military intelligence, and these are very solid people with advanced degrees, in engineering and other things, very respectable, solid backgrounds and professions. And what I tell people when I'm relaying this story is not only do we have the remarkable nature of the experiences, but the quality and solidness of the experiencers, which makes this story just really, really sound and unique, in my opinion.
So let's talk about paranormal hotspots. What is it? What is the common denominator between, say, the Meadow that you're studying and Hessdalen or Skinwalker or Sedona?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I knew. I have a few theories, or I can take a stab at it. One thing I noticed when I was researching this, and I come from a military intelligence background. That's what I was originally trained at back during the Cold War, and being somewhat technological Luddites, in the 80s, is when we would do our maps. We would have a large topographical map, and we would have a acetate overlay that we would tape up to the map, and we would draw out troop locations and avenues of advance, and where we wanted to put certain reconnaissance elements and all of this. And so I want people to imagine doing that same kind of technique, except with paranormal events and paranormal happenings. You have a map. So let's take our first overlay, and we're going to put down UFO sightings. So every time there's a UFO sighting, you mark it on your map, on your overlay. And you take that overlay off, you put a new piece of acetate over your map, and let's start marking Bigfoot sightings. So you mark Bigfoot sightings. You take that overlay off, put a new overlay on, and we will start marking ghost sightings or high strangeness and folklore. The next thing you do is take all three overlays and you put them on your map, and they coincide. For some reason, there are certain geographical locations where they are hotspots, not just for one type of paranormal, and I use that as a very broad term, not just one type of paranormal happenings, but all types of paranormal happenings. Now, why is it? Why is this? There are tons of theories. Is it a place where there's a very thin veil between our dimension and a next dimension? Are there portals? Are there gateways? Sedona, a lot of people talk about gateways and portals in Sedona. Are they areas of geomagnetic anomalies that for some reason attract these type of activities? Are they areas that run across certain geographical markers like ley lines? That's one of the things that we're trying to figure out. We are trying to bring into the field a lot of technological research, and we're trying to find a common denominator. Every time we have an anomalous event happen in the Meadow or in the area surrounding the Meadow, we have an array of equipment that we're trying to detect any kind of anomaly. Is there a correlation between electromagnetic fields? We have a tri-field meter. Is there a correlation between radiation spikes? And I'm here to tell you we're seeing a little bit of a correlation with minor spikes in radiation. And I'm talking microsieverts, not anything extraordinary, but very small spikes in radiation. If we could come up with the field deployable equipment, would we start detecting microgravities? If we had the equipment and the ability to do it, could we start detecting little shifts in micro time? I'm talking about billionths of a second. Does time run differently there? So I think that there's something to it. I think there's a common denominator with all of these strange locations. It's just going to take us a while to figure out exactly what that is.
We had looked at a number of different hotspots around the U.S. and looked for Native American connections, because all the ones that we looked at had still had not only a deep, long history of Native American presence, but current Native American presence. I guess that wouldn't apply to Hessdalen, Norway, or Romania's forest, but it does seem to have a correlation at hotspots here in North America. So I was curious when I even heard about your book. The first thing I wanted to ask was about the Native American experiences, legends, their lore and mythology and religion, what they would speak of it. And you addressed that early in the book. You mentioned a couple of different tribes that had been in this area.
Yes, sir. There were quite a few tribes there. Unfortunately, we had a terrible event in the history of the southern United States called the Trail of Tears, and many of the Native American and First Nations people were forcibly relocated by the U.S. military to the west. So there's not a large Native presence in the southeast like you would have maybe in the west, like in the United County or somewhere like that up in Utah. But there is a history. There is still, various tribes do have a representation and a presence here. And especially the Cherokee have a long oral tradition and a written tradition of spirits in the forest, Sasquatch-type creatures, evil shamans. One is known as Spearfinger, which is an evil witch that devours souls.
Yeah, that struck a nerve with me there. The name's great, but it sure sounds a heck of a lot like the Skinwalker legend.
Oh, it does. It does. And I think what you're looking at is maybe different names for the same phenomena. And I'll give you an example, coming from a European, perspective. Here in the U.S., we think of grays, and we think about that wonderful illustration on the front of Whitley Strieber's book. But if you go back 500 years to Scotland or Ireland, that might be the wee people, or an elf, or a pixie. So I think that these phenomena happen all over the world, and different cultures label them and react to them in different ways.
Let me ask you about the folklore, because that's one of your rules, is follow the folklore. So the folklore for this particular area, and we're going to drill down on it in a little bit, is that this is a graveyard that was unmarked and somebody drilled a road right over it, and it's been sort of desecrated. Did you confirm that there was, in fact, a graveyard out there?
Oh, yeah, there definitely is a graveyard. And let me, a point of clarification is that was basically a starting off point. That's several miles from the Meadow. That area is not really that close to the Meadow. But the area that started all of this, absolutely there's a graveyard. And in the book, there's a photograph of me in that particular graveyard. So there's a lot of folklore here. There is history going back of people seeing what they called back in the day wild men, wild, hairy men, which, you move up to the 20th century, that sounds like a report of a Sasquatch.
Trey, your rule of thumb is follow the folklore, as we discussed in the last segment. Has that worked for you on other hotspots? Have you looked in other places where the folklore turns out to be true?
Yeah, in traditional paranormal investigation, a lot of times you can go and look at, and my background primarily started off as a traditional paranormal investigator, not as a ufologist or a cryptid researcher.
So you're like a ghost hunter.
Yeah, or paranormal investigator. What we would always do is when we went into a traditional, ghost case, is would go back, scour, records. We would look at property records. We would look at newspaper reports, and a lot of times in areas that were really, really, really active, you had a history of this. You could crosswalk it back. There was either an oral history or a written history of items of high strangeness in this particular locale, be it a business, a home, a geographical location, whatever. And if we kind of open up our mind a little bit, you hear about haunted cemeteries. Well, maybe the fact that these places are quote unquote haunted isn't because they're a cemetery. Maybe it was an area of high strangeness before the cemetery was ever built, or maybe there was some sort of instinctual draw to this area where the builders thought, well, this would be a good place to put a cemetery. So that's something that's very interesting if you think about it. You talk about Native American First Nation burial sites being areas of high energy, and a lot of people put the burial sites prior to the high energy. One causes the other. But what if it's the other way around? What if the reason that the burial site is there is because of high energy, and that people, be they Native Americans, First Nation folks, or early American settlers, or whatever, somehow on a very gut level knew that this energy was there and felt drawn to inter their deceased loved ones in this area of high energy.
Yeah, I got you on that. I'd ask you about the native people in the book. You mentioned about the Creeks, and they have something called the Isti Papa. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes. Let me look back.
It's Isti Papa, and there's also a Kolowa, Kolowa, some kind of immortal fairy folk or something like that.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. That's Cherokee.
That's Cherokee. Yeah, there are quite a few Native American, folkloric, creatures and all. There was one, the non-Yoni-Wi, or stone giant, which was a human-like sorcerer that would consume human beings and control their minds and interact with ghosts. That sounds a lot like a skinwalker, out west. You mentioned the fairy-like beings that would protect the Cherokees. They were apparently like small gnomes or fairies or elves. There's another one called the Raven Mocker that would relieve the dying of their beating heart. And we talked a little bit earlier about Spearfinger, and she was an evil witch which would eat the livers of unlucky travelers or villagers. There's also a history of the Istipapa, like you mentioned, which is a two-legged creature that would eat men. And the Kalawa is a hairy beast with, described as being like a gorilla, which matches modern-day depictions of Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
So as a paranormal investigator, if you would primarily go out on what we'd call ghost hunting, a lot of folks who are in that are not comfortable being in the UFO camp. A lot of UFO people despise the ghost hunters. The Bigfoot people hate all of them. But invariably, it seems, all these kind of subjects all get mixed up into one pot, especially when you got sort of a general hotspot where all the activity occurs. And I guess you have to learn to sort of get along with everybody and respect the evidence wherever it leads you.
That's an excellent point. Where does the data take you? I think it's rather foolish to look at just one experience and discard the rest. In my training at West Georgia in psychology, it's a very humanistic, experiential psychology program. So I was trained to be a little more open-minded on some things. And, I've experienced that myself. For various reasons, I went to a Bigfoot conference several years ago and wore a T-shirt that said Oxford Paranormal Society. So I was the lone paranormal guy at a Bigfoot conference. It was, kind of a sore thumb, sticking out. And I kept getting a lot of kind of side glances from many of the attendees, like, what's this paranormal guy doing here? But the strange thing is that during the break, various attendees would kind of come over to me on the sly and say, hey, I want to talk to you. Because when we were out researching cryptids, this happened to me. And they were things that fell, within the realm of what you would call ghost hunting or paranormal investigation. And I think these things are happening, over and over again in these different fields, ufology, cryptid research, paranormal research. And thankfully, people are starting to maybe open their minds a little bit. Very well-known Bigfoot researcher James Bobo Fay, on a documentary I watched a few months ago, admitted that while he was out doing oftentimes cryptid researching, he would see bright flashes of light in the forest or high up in trees. Well, this corresponds directly with some of the phenomena that we've experienced. This corresponds also directly with folklore of fairy lights, will-o'-the-wisps, jack-o'-lanterns, things like that. So I think people are starting to open up their mind a little bit, and the only way that we can really address this issue and maybe come to some sort of cohesive answer is if we all work together and maybe feel comfortable stepping outside of our little preconceived box.
Let's talk about why the location is secret. You said you wanted to keep it pristine. The problem with that, of course, is, as I'm sure it's occurred to you, is people are going to have a hard time believing you if they can't confirm something about it. So you have in the book, there's this fairly detailed account of UFO cases in this area, and some of them are really spectacular. But of course, if you tell us that you're looking at MUFON's database that told you about some of these activities in this area around this spot that you've given a name, there's no way that anybody can go to MUFON records and say, yeah, there it is. There's that case that they talk about in the book, because you don't reveal the location.
Right. And that took some soul searching. This story, these experiences aren't my experiences. They belong to the world. It'd be rather selfish of me to keep them to myself. So my real reason for writing all this was to let people know what's going on out there. But unfortunately, in like places, like locales that have similar type of phenomena happening, once the location is disclosed, you have a heck of a time keeping it pristine. I know you were involved with the ranch out there in United County in Utah. Once that location was disclosed, the current owner and previous owners of the ranch have to keep a sizable security force on site just to keep people from coming in and either disrupting the site or, unfortunately, vandalizing or destroying it. And so my team and I, we had to do a lot of soul searching, and we changed names. We changed locations a little bit. All of the data that I took leading, during the preface, not the preface of the book, the folkloric and history part of the book, are taken from public records. And what I put out there is, people can believe this or not. That's up to them. That's totally up to them. I have a stack of affidavits from my team. None of this stuff was observed, for the most part, singularly. These were group experiences. And the only way that we can keep this site pristine is to try to keep it somewhat close hold. Now, the other part of the story is people do know the location. I think you and I communicated back in 2019, and you know the location.
Yeah.
So, it is out there. But one thing that I require is, before I disclose the location, is a non-disclosure agreement. And that's just to protect not only the site, but protect my team when we're out there researching. I had an unfortunate experience. I was invited by a cryptid research group to go up to the Uwharrie National Forest and do some research with them several years ago. There's a very well-known site which has been featured in several Bigfoot shows called Gates Place Campground. It's pretty well known in the Bigfooting community. We arrived Friday night and had the campsite pretty much to ourselves, but much to our surprise, when we awoke Saturday morning, there were about 30 to 40 other tents and campsites there. People just came in during the night and this area exploded. So the sad thing is when we were out trying to do some research Saturday night, whatever we heard or experienced, we didn't know if it was actually a cryptid or an incident of high strangeness or somebody else, in the same area that we're detecting them, or even worse, somebody trying to hoax us. So that left a really bad taste, in my mouth. I thought that's not a good way of going about researching. So, I just have to ask for people's indulgence, and trust my judgment in trying to keep this area secret.
Could you describe, so you call it Blackwater Preserve, I think it is, and it spans like 5 counties in whatever state or states this is in, but that's not the actual name. So is it public property or private property or a combination?
The area that I call the bi-state strip, which is a bi-state area of high strangeness, is both. And when I wrote the portion of the book that talks about the history, it's just kind of being an analyst, I went from macro to micro. I looked at this huge area of high strangeness that encompasses 2 states, and then I narrowed it down to the 5 counties that touch the Blackwater Nature Preserve, all the high strangeness that goes on there, and then narrowed down into the Blackwater Nature Preserve. The Blackwater Nature Preserve itself is public land.
You had mentioned West Georgia, University of West Georgia. I lived in Carrollton for 2 years, went to school there on a debate scholarship, so I know that area really well. And I appreciated your mention of it, because it's a good school, the psychology program in particular. The I'm sorry.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Back to Blackwater. So your group starts researching the history of it. You come up with UFO cases going back to 1951, Bigfoot cases going back to 1956, some really fairly spectacular UFO incidents, buzzing cars into the 80s and 90s. People could confirm that if they have a general idea where it is, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And have you run into other people out there? You said the word is sort of out in some circles. Has it been overrun or by different kinds of groups that are investigating the same things you are?
No, not so much. Every once in a while, we'll run into another group or individual that's doing, more traditional Sasquatch type research. This area does have, surprisingly, I'm being sarcastic, comes as no surprise, there's quite a few Sasquatch sightings in this area. So every once in a while, we'll run across somebody out doing that. But as far as focusing on this little narrow, 4 to 5 acre epicenter of high strangeness, as far as I know, we're unique in being able to pinpoint and research that location. So we pretty much still have the location to ourselves. But once again, I am not averse to other researchers coming. I just request that they sign a non-disclosure agreement. And the only thing that NDA covers is the location. They are free to discuss their experiences, the events. All of that is, wide open. The only thing I like to try to keep inviolate is the location.
You have a couple of cases involving police officers who witness weird stuff. So did they give you affidavits? Did you interview them, or how did you get that information?
The police officer situation was basically taken out of public knowledge, public records.
And do you want to describe the incidents, what they saw?
Yes, let me find that.
It's a lot to remember. You've got a lot of stuff packed in the book.
Yeah. It is. I'm actually just having to flip through my copy of the book right now. That's fine. That's not a problem. Is in the area that I call the Bi-State Strip, there was just tons of strange stuff. And there was a UFO flap or UAP flap that happened quite a few years ago, in this area. One of them is there's a small town, and this happened, in the 80s. Local police department started getting reports of a wedge-shaped craft. Now imagine that, a wedge-shaped UFO. We've never heard of that before. Kidding. Right. The police chief and one of his officers drove their cruiser to investigate it. They noticed a strange light off in the distance, and they decided to go up to a remote hilltop where they could get a higher vantage, of what was going on in the area below them. They watched the strange craft fly off, and they decided to return to the station. On their way back, they got a call from their dispatcher saying that a neighboring agency, another police department, had reported once again a strange triangle-shaped vessel heading in their directions. They stopped their cruiser, looked up at the sky, and saw a huge triangle traveling directly overhead. They shut the engine of their vehicle off, and they noticed that the vehicle, the aerial vehicle, didn't make any sound at all. And much to their surprise, the vehicle just silently floated off into the distance. And this particular case was witnessed by over 50 people.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
There's also 1996 cattle mutilations in the area. Was that multiple mutilations?
As far as I know, just the one. This, is cattle country. And, we do have, coyotes and, other creatures like that, feral dogs. And I could only find one case that kind of fit the fit the cattle mutilation type situation. It's not something that happens a whole lot in this area, but it's not, entirely unheard of. Now, once again, like I said, we've got, quite a few coyotes and things like that. So, dead animals are not uncommon. But that's the only case that I could actually find was that one.
So the geocacher who got ran into the locals with the shotguns, who warned them, hey, it's dangerous out here. Have you been able to sort of pierce the veil and talk to locals about the legends and find out if in fact the community out there in that area does believe that there's some danger involved in being in the general vicinity?
Nothing more than just general, we don't go out there at night, and when you start pinning it down, it's like, why? Well, we don't know. We just don't go out there at night. And that could be a cultural, admonition back from the pioneer days of, you just don't go out in the woods at night. And it might be a cultural carryover from that. There are areas, in this, locale where there have been some horrible things that have happened, and these areas are taboo. There's almost like there's a negative stigma attached to it. And one of the counties, not directly touching the Blackwater Nature Preserve, but near it, there was a particularly horrible murder, and I don't mention this in the book. And the area where this murder happened is down a dark, lonely, forlorn road, and locals just don't like to go there. So it's a general sense of unease in some of these areas, but nothing that the locals can put their fingers directly on.
Well, you do have some stories in the book. Some hikers who find a foot sticking out of the ground.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a dead guy in a tent, a 51-year-old woman who vanished, and I think
Yeah.
her body was found. Yeah, so
Yeah, it's a weird area. As recently, and I would have to go back and look in my notes, last year there was another body found in the Blackwater Nature Preserve. So, is it one of those areas because of its remoteness that people go out there to do nefarious things, or is it an area that draws nefarious people who just happen to do nefarious things?
Trey Hudson, let's go down the list of some of the expeditions you and your group have made out there, when they started, and what your first experience was in the area that you're describing in the Meadow project.
Yeah, absolutely. We had talked a little bit about our 2015 trip out there, which was just more or less an outing to see if this area had anything going on of interest. We had the strange change of perception that I experienced going down to Stevens Lake. We had the vehicles locking and unlocking, and then we had the willowy, wispy figure move across the roadway as we were traveling along those dark roads. Needless to say, our interest was piqued. This was an area that seemed to be hopping. Something was going on here. And you tie this in with all the folklore that I talk about in the first portion of the book, indicates that this area is going to be something of interest. Well, January 2016, we decided to really start looking into this area in earnest. We camped at an area called the Cold Springs Campground. Not that area had anything in particular interest-wise to us. It was just a nice location to camp at. Decided we would use that as our base of operations. A good friend of mine, Bob, who is pretty well known on some of the Bigfoot shows. He's been featured in some of those. He's a cryptid researcher. His partner, Daryl, and myself decided to take a trip to this area that weekend. And we were going to be met by the rest of our team later on. The real odd thing that happened that weekend is that Daryl and I traveled about 30 miles south to the haunted road that the local, earlier in the broadcast we talked about, told us not to go down, except, under extreme circumstances. We decided we were going to check out this road, and we left Bob back at base camp. So we traveled about 30 miles south and were able to stay in communication using a local high-altitude repeater on a mountaintop. And Daryl and I hiked along this haunted road, hit a trail that bisects called the Possum Trot Trail, which is the longest trail in this area, came around and walked back to our vehicle. During our trek around a mountain called Berger's Peak, we heard what sounded like a quail whistle. Now, this was in January at high altitude. Usually you don't hear quail, which is a lowland bird, in a highland-type environment. So we thought that something really amazing had happened. We heard this, anomalous Bob White, quail call in an area that's, known for high strangeness and Sasquatch sightings. And we thought, wow, we have really, this is really the peak of our weekend. And we radioed Bob back once we got back to our Jeep. We're heading north. Said, hey, you're not going to believe what happened to us. And he kind of chuckled and he said, yeah, wait until I tell you what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doggone it, nothing is supposed to happen back at base camp. That's why it's base camp. So we got back to our base camp and told Bob our rather pathetic, anemic story of our bird call. and he said, well, let me tell you what happened to me. He said, while y'all were out there, I was staying back here minding base camp, and I was sitting here in the drizzly rain, by myself, and had to take care of some business like, men do when they're out camping after drinking too much coffee. And he decided to step out to the rear of our campsite and take care of that business. And when he's finished, he looking up in the sky, which had been cloudy and overcast all evening. A cold, dreary rain in the America South is just something miserable. And he saw the moon appear, a large luminous orb like the moon. And he's like, oh, well, great, the moon has come up. I can see it now. That means the sky is clearing, and perhaps the rest of the weekend will be very nice and clear. So he's watching the moon and having happy thoughts about the weather improving. And then the moon starts moving sideways. Now, I don't know about the rest of the country, but here in the South, the moon just doesn't move sideways.
Right.
And so he's watching this with amazement, and the moon stops, or this luminous orb stops. And in the middle of it, he sees a very small pinprick of blackness. That pinprick starts expanding, almost like the iris of a camera. Black spot or the black circle is getting larger and larger and larger until it just about encompasses the entire orb. And what he's left with is a circle, almost like the ring of diamonds effect during an eclipse. And then it eventually completely blots out. Not long after that, up on top of the ridge, adjacent to our campsite, just to the north, he notices a series of small clusters of lights dancing along the top of the ridge. Now, this isn't, like I said, in January, so you're not going to have lightning bugs or fireflies out at this time of year. And these lights turn out to be somewhat common, during our investigations over, the several years. These lights in the forest are really, really common, not only during our investigation in this area in general. So we decided to return in July of 2016. And the high strangeness started kicking up a few notches.
Yeah, this is a good trip. You bring FLIR equipment, this kind of equipment that captures some really interesting images on this trip and other trips, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All of our teams have FLIR, with them, handheld binoculars, which have turned out to be just a phenomenal piece of equipment. And our most amazing, video evidence has been captured on FLIR. And we discovered, adjacent to the Cold Springs campsite, there was a large meadow, about quarter of a mile away from the campsite, within hiking distance. You have to, take your gear in there on your back. But we thought this would be a really neat place to go out there in the environment. It's remote, it's isolated, it's very quiet, and it's very pristine and beautiful. It's a nice location. We thought this would be a really neat place to do some research. We've had this history of Sasquatch. We've seen these strange lights now. This meadow seemed to be a good location to start our research at. And boy, did we hit the mark on that one. During this particular trip, we decided to start off with 3 teams in the meadow, 3 two-man teams. Each team was equipped with a FLIR unit. We were going to have Bob, once again, walk along the top of a ridge line, which is to the south of the meadow. The idea with that is he would be at a higher vantage point than us, and if there was anything between us and the top of the ridge, hopefully he would drive it down to the meadow, and we would be able to pick it up on our FLIR equipment, our thermal equipment. That was the idea. And we all have radios, so we're in constant radio communication with each other. We also have a net control station, or a base station back at base camp. That operator is logging everything that we do, so we know where every team location is. All the teams are in direct communications with each other, and we have a base control station logging all activity. So it's controlled pretty tightly. It's not just a bunch of people running around in the woods with no real purpose or mission.
Right. Yeah, it's good planning. Good planning. Yep.
So as 3 teams got to the meadow, they set up in the east, center, and west portions of the meadow. And once we were set up, we radioed back to Bob. He could go ahead and start hiking towards the ridge. And we had a radio transmission from Bob several moments later. And he said, "Hey, guys, I arrived at," and he mentioned a pretty well-known landmark. And he said, "I don't know how I got here." He said, "I don't remember walking here." So the first thing, that goes through everybody's mind, and I mentioned before, we've got a lot of medical people on our team, is perhaps he had some sort of aneurysm or stroke, that he blacked out. So we were concerned. And we said, do you need us to send a team to you to evacuate you out of the area, or what do you want to do? And he goes, no, I think I'm fine. So then the medical questions came. Have you lost feeling in either side of your body? Do you have bilateral feeling? Do you have any headaches? How's your balance, et cetera, et cetera? And to all of these things, he replied in the affirmative. I'm fine. I just don't remember how I got here. Well, we've all been hiking in the woods and have zoned out, and next thing you know, you arrive at your location and you don't have a solid recollection of getting there. So that's what we chalked that up to. So he decided he wanted to continue on the top of the ridge to see if anything could be detected or driven down to us and detected by our other FLIR teams down in the meadow. He did that. He moved from the east side of the meadow, or east side of the ridge to the west side of the ridge. Once he reached the west side, he dropped down off the ridge into the meadow, west end, and started heading back. Our teams picked him up on FLIR. The particular team that had him under observation was manned by two gentlemen. One was Tim G. Tim G's background is he's a former U.S. Army Ranger and has a degree in physics from the Georgia Institute of Technology.
Wow.
Very solid, grounded individual. The gentleman next to him also has a degree from Georgia Tech, has a master's degree, and has been a practicing paramedic for 20 years. Also a solid, grounded individual. So they have their FLIR units, and they watch Bob drop down into the meadow and starts traversing the edge of the meadow. Through their FLIRs, they see a band-shaped heat signature, as you would expect. And to their astonishment, this band-shaped heat signature turns into an orb or a circle or a sphere of heat and moves at an extremely rapid pace across the meadow. And when we measured it all and calculated it, the movement was at about 25 miles an hour. Now, there is no way that a human being, even the top athlete, can move across this terrain at 25 miles an hour at night. You just can't do it. And so, they were absolutely astonished, and they were watching this on their FLIR units, and then the sphere turns back into the shape of a man. So once again, the team was rather concerned about Bob's well-being, and they radio him, Bob, are you okay? And they're watching this figure on their FLIR. They see the figure take a radio, put it up to its mouth, and respond. So definitely the figure that they saw was Bob. Bob, are you okay? Yes, why do you ask? Well, we need to talk about it when you get over to us, but are you okay? Yes, I'm absolutely fine. I don't know what the concern is. So Bob goes over to them, and they're explaining to him what they saw. And they said, well, what was your experience? And Bob said, I don't know. I was just walking along the edge of the field, the meadow. Nothing seemed out of place to me. So, the question of that is, whose perception was altered? Was Bob's perception altered, or was their perception altered? Who had time speed up, Bob or them? So, these are starting some of the anomalous, weird things that are happening in this location.
I'm trying to remember if this is where there's a weird pattern with the GPS tracker that you realize afterward. You analyze where somebody had been, that it's a way more movement than should have been normal.
Oh, this is it. This is definitely that trip. And so, Bob turning into an orb was a bit disturbing for us. And the rest of the evening happened without any incident. So it was the rest of the evening was rather quiet. And that's kind of a hard act to top there. You're turning into an orb and flying across the meadow. So we made it back to base camp and did a quick after action review and recorded our notes. And the next morning, as we were gathering around to eat breakfast around the campfire, and chit chat, visit a little bit, Bob came out of his tent with his GPS unit. Now, Bob's background is he's a retired law enforcement officer from California and worked for years and years and years in backcountry search and rescue. Just an incredible, talented, and competent woodsman. And one of the things that Bob always does is he runs a tracking line on his GPS whenever he's out in the woods. So his GPS is constantly tracking him, recording his movements. This is a good idea for several reasons. So he came and showed us his GPS, there were, like I said, several witnesses to this. He said, I want to show you what my track line showed last night. He pulled up the track, and it showed him making several trips of 2 to 4 kilometers in straight lines. Now, you can't move in a straight line over this terrain. It's too rugged on foot. You know, it's almost impossible. Certainly, you can't do it by vehicle because there's no roads in some of these areas. So we started thinking about it, and the only way that Bob could have moved in straight lines, 2 to 4 kilometer stretches, legs, would be as if he was in the air for some reason.
Yeah, yeah, that's
you know, take that for what it's worth. So we decided that we were, you know, once Bob got back, he was going to download those tracks to an SD card, you know, send it to me, and I would go ahead and put it in our electronic notes. I have a hard drive that I store this stuff on. And to our disappointment and surprise, when Bob got back, all of that was erased. It was
oh man,
GPS.
Well, that stuff happens in places like this.
It does.
Did you ever find any tracks, animal tracks, like Bigfoot prints, anything like that? I know you found some tire tracks that are pretty weird on one of the trips.
No, yeah, we never found any, any Bigfoot prints or cryptid prints. That's one of the things that kind of, you know, drew us to the Meadow. Is there were some rather boggy areas on the edge of it, and we thought, you know, if we investigate this meadow or this field, there's some good track traps. You know, maybe we would see something. But no, we've never seen any. Now there have been people, you know, in the past that have researched this area that have found some, but not particularly our team, no.
I think this is the trip, July 2016. You saw a white humanoid at like 3 a.m. That could be me. I mean, I'm a white humanoid, I guess. My hair is getting whiter all the time.
Well, yeah, what happens to the best of us, George? Yeah, it was one of our team members, the gentleman Glenn, who runs base camp, and he is his background is a career paramedic. Was a flight paramedic for many years. Medevac personnel from hotspots all over the world. So, you know, once again, another well-grounded, sober, solid individual. So he got up at 2 a.m. to take care of some business and had stepped out to the edge of our camp. And as he's finishing up, he notices right around this tree at the edge of the camp, about 30, 40 yards out of camp, he sees a white humanoid-type figure, you know, white in color, appears to be peeking out around a tree watching us. And, you know, he was very shocked, very surprised, and went to wake up one of our other team members that has a high-dollar, you know, very, very sophisticated FLIR unit to get her to bring her equipment out to see if we could capture this creature on FLIR. And by the time that she could gather her wits about her and gather her equipment, the figure was gone. Many of our team are trained in man tracking, combat tracking. So we went out and we looked at the area where Glenn had said this creature was, and we looked for, you know, any marks on the tree where maybe a hand was, you know, any footprints, any compression of the ground or the vegetation. We could find none. What's interesting is if you go back once again to the folklore, there is a lot of history of a white hominid-type creature in this region that people have reported seeing for a long, long, long time. Almost, some people describe it as like a white-colored Sasquatch or Sasquatch with light-colored fur, and other people describe it just as a white, vaguely humanoid-type figure. So once again, what we're experiencing just locks right in with the existing folklore, which was really kind of cool. We were rather excited about that. So that was our trip in July of 2016. Pretty cool stuff. Not even remotely the weirdest that's happened here. In 2017, in February, we returned. We like to go out there in the wintertime for several reasons. Number one is there's not a lot of people out there. This is, you know, a nature preserve, and you have people camping and, you know, hiking and stuff. Not a lot of people there in February. And we have less vegetation. You know, you can see further with your FLIR equipment when the vegetation is off the trees, bushes, and brambles and stuff like that. 2017 in February, once we decided to go back, you know, during the wintertime to explore the meadow once again. We were going to use the same protocol that we used before, except we decided, since Bob's situation and some of his experiences, we were never going to have somebody go out solo. We were always going to have at least two people on a team. So we opted to have 3 two-man teams in the meadow equipped with their thermal FLIR units and have a 3-man team working along the ridge. Once again, the team on the ridge moved from east to west, and that was the team I was on. And when we dropped down to the edge of the meadow, we noticed 3 figures, human-sized figures, 6 foot, 5'11", 6 foot tall, side by side, turn into one figure, and this was on the FLIR. So these items were putting out heat. So you had 3 heat signatures meld into one heat signature and then dissipate. We have radio communications. We made sure that there were no teams in this area, and there were not. Every team gave their location. So these strange entities were forming. We didn't really know what to make of that. And we dropped down in the meadow and started moving once again from west to east, linking up with the teams as we moved along. And we had radio contact with our team, which was centrally located in the middle of the meadow. And they said that they have noticed on their FLIRs these boxes forming. Now, these boxes, they estimated to be about 10 by 6 by 6 meters. So these large cubes forming on their FLIR units. And unfortunately, with FLIR, you don't run the record option all the time because it will drain your batteries. So by the time they get hit record, these cubes started dissipating. But we decided we would investigate anyway. So we met up with this team, and I decided we would send a group of people into the area where this cube or box or portal or whatever you want to call it was. So we were watching on the FLIR unit as the team approached this area. As they approached the area, now once again, let me remind everybody that we have no vegetation. This is wintertime. Vegetation is dead. We're watching the team through our FLIR units approach this area where this portal or this box was, and they disappear. They disappear off the FLIR unit. One thing you can't do with a FLIR unit is hide from it. It's almost impossible, especially in an area that has a cold ambient temperature as compared to the hot heat of a human body. And these team members just disappeared off the FLIR. And it was so startling that the FLIR operator, you can actually hear him on video say, "Did they just disappear?" And when we questioned the team members, they said it was almost like walking into an area that was surrounded by a black curtain. It was extremely dark and dense, the environment was. When they approached this area, they did not have to fight through any dead brambles or dead briars or anything like that. It was a smooth transition into this area. When they came out, lo and behold, they did have obstacles in their way. The obstacles were not there present going in. The obstacles were present coming out, which was rather remarkable. The neat thing is we have all of this on video. So to my knowledge, this is the first and only video I know of people actually approaching, what you can call a portal, you can label it whatever you wish, disappearing from view and then coming back out. Not long after that, one of the FLIR operators swings her FLIR unit over to the right, which is facing west in the meadow, and she says, "Who or what is that?" And there is what appears to be 2 more heat signatures watching us from a small copse of trees about 30 yards away. And I have a photograph of these figures, these heat signatures in the book. So we were absolutely just amazed at this turn of events. Historical. Nobody has ever experienced anything like this, and we gathered together rather excitedly there in the meadow, and we're discussing what we should do next. I made the decision that we needed to go ahead and terminate investigations for the evening, go back, do an after-action review, and try to take all of our data and record it and make sure that we all understood exactly what we saw, start taking statements and things like that. By the time we got ready to move out, my base camp operator said, "Trey, there's somebody here that wants to see you." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know you want to see me. I'm on my way back." And he goes, No, there's somebody else that wants to see you. So this is 10:30 at night, 22:30 hours at night, in the wintertime, in a remote forest in the middle of the night. and there's somebody there that wants to see me, okay, I'm game. So we make way back to the base camp. And when we get there, there's a businesswoman there. She's wearing loafers, slacks, a blouse, and a blazer in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. And this woman is absolutely incessant that we drop what we're doing. We cancel our after-action review, and we follow her down to this very remote road in the nature preserve. And she said there's a structure at the end of this road, and this structure is inhabited by a family of what she calls, and I quote, monkey bears. And she was, absolutely just, determined to make us go down this road. Well, I'll be damned if I'm going to follow some strange businesswoman down a dark forest road, in the middle of the night. That just doesn't sound like the most safest thing to do. And during the course of this conversation with this woman, she starts asking a little bit about our backgrounds. And she asked me, where did you go to university? And I said, at the University of West Georgia. And she said, oh, I did too. She goes, well, what did you study? I said, well, my degree's in psychology. She goes, well, mine too. And I'm thinking, okay, now this is she's putting me on. I said, well, ma'am, tell me some of the professors, that you studied under. And she actually started naming some of my professors that I knew.
That's a pretty big coincidence there, middle of the night out. Yeah, this lady just shows up in your camp. She went to your school, had the same professors.
Yeah, I think she had the same degree. It was just, I was feeling a little uneasy about her wanting us to go out to that remote location because I didn't know if we were going to be robbed or probed or what.
Is she boozy? Is she doing meth? Is she on drugs or messed up? Or
she was messed up. Glenn, our base camp operator, career paramedic, stated in his statement, said, I have never in my life seen somebody act as messed up as this woman was. So she is just acting crazy. And to top it off, she stops, the conversation with us, steps out about 20 yards, 30 yards from, where our base was. We're at our radio and our tables and everything. And she was right at the edge of our lantern light. You could still see her. And she squats down and urinates in front of everybody. I don't even know what to do with that.
Did she arrive in a car?
Yeah, she was in a car. And she had a young male, and she said was her son, and I put son in quotation marks because I don't know the biological relationship between this, 15-year-old estimated male and her. So this kid sat there very stoically, not engaging with any of us. So there's these just two strange people appearing for no reason.
You kind of compare it to a Men in Black type episode.
I did, and I started, doing some research. I went and looked at some of Nick Redfern's stuff and some of John Keel's stuff. And the things that started hopping out at me was not properly dressed for the occasion, strangely dressed, not understanding cultural protocols, i.e., you don't just squat and urinate in front of people you don't know. The missing of cueing, the body cueing and the vocal cueing of, hey, go away, we have business to do, leave us alone. She never picked up on that. And she finally just got frustrated and left. I did do some research on the name that she gave us, and it does correspond with a woman who is a professional in this region. Now, here's the deal. Is the woman whose name, who also matched the description of the woman that was at our campsite, is a licensed professional. I'm not going to tell you what her profession is out of privacy, but she is a licensed professional. Her activities and behavior that night would probably cause her to have her license revoked and end her career. So either I encountered a professional licensed woman on absolutely the worst night of her life in the middle of the forest in the wintertime, or it was something masquerading as this woman, like a doppelganger.
Well, not to mention what she's done to the reputation of monkey bears. I mean,
yeah.
all right.
talking about high strangeness peaking. As I'm discussing, these events with other people since the book has come out, it seems like high strangeness in general is starting to become, more prevalent. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. Does that mean we're getting ready to move into the next phase of awareness or consciousness? Does it mean that, our interaction with the planet has caused certain things to manifest because of what we're doing to the environment? Or is it just that we're lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective, to live in a time when we have high strangeness starting to manifest in so many different ways? Another thing is maybe we're just looking at it differently, like we talked about earlier, that your various disciplines are looking at high strangeness and starting to see maybe an interconnectivity. Some of the things that we're looking at is what are some of the phenomenology, especially here in the Meadow. There is a phenomenon called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which can cause people to have senses of paranoia, agitation, and if you take that to its next step, perhaps violence. So maybe that's something that's going on here. Something that we've detected in the Meadow in particular is radiation spikes, very, very small radiation spikes, but nevertheless radiation spikes. We detected that during some SD sessions, which I go into a little bit more in the book, and some other times that we see radiation spikes. So absolutely, these areas of high strangeness could have environmental effects that could determine whether somebody behaves rationally or irrationally.
She was also asking about sort of the aspects of cartoonish and farcical sort of activity that pops up in proximity with these hotspots. That was just ridiculous on purpose.
Right. I mean, and I think the mysterious businesswoman of the forest was just crazy. It was almost like a surrealistic avant-garde film. It was so bizarre. And, to this day,